There is a little girl running through the rain tonight in Portland, Oregon. She is 7 years old. She is deaf, and she is covered in burns that nobody in this city has ever bothered to see. Every teacher looked past her. Every social worker closed her file. Every doctor signed the paperwork and sent her back to the man who put cigarettes out on her skin. Tonight, she will run barefoot through Laurelhurst Park in the pouring rain, and she will crash into the most dangerous people she has ever met: 8 bikers, a scarred veteran who hasn't slept in 4 years, and his deaf wife who will hear what no one else would. What happens next will tear an entire state apart. If this story doesn't grab you in the first 5 minutes, nothing will. Stay until the end. Because the twist in this one, nobody sees it coming. Hit that like button, drop a comment, and tell me what city you're watching from right now. Let's ride. Part 1. The rain came sideways that October night, driven by a Pacific wind that smelled like salt and rust and something colder underneath. Portland had been drowning for 3 days straight. Storm drains overflowed into gutters. Gutters flooded into streets. Streets turned into shallow rivers that reflected the brake lights of slow-moving traffic and the flicker of neon signs nobody was reading. It was the kind of rain that made people lock their doors early, the kind that emptied parks and silenced playgrounds and turned entire neighborhoods into gray, dripping wastelands, where the only sound was water hitting pavement and the occasional groan of wind pushing through Douglas fir. Laurelhurst Park sat empty. Almost. Lily Vale moved through the tree line like something small and hunted. 7 years old. 46 pounds. Brown hair plastered flat against a face too thin for her age. She wore an oversized hoodie 3 sizes too big. The sleeves pulled down past her wrists and clenched in white-knuckled fists, not for warmth, but for hiding. Underneath the fabric, 6 circular burns on her left forearm, 4 on her right. 2 on the back of her neck, just below the hairline, where nobody would think to look unless they already knew. She was running, but she didn't know where. That was the thing about Lily. She had never known where. Born deaf into a world that already didn't want her, she'd been passed through 3 foster homes in 2 years. The first family called her difficult. The second said she was non-communicative. The third, the Mercer household, simply stopped talking about her at all. Wade Mercer signed the paperwork, collected the monthly check, and closed the bedroom door behind him every night with a look that made Lily's stomach turn to ice. Nobody taught her that she was allowed to scream, and even if they had, who would hear? She had tried. Once, at Jefferson Elementary, she signed frantically to a teacher named Mrs. Hayward during lunch period. Her small hands moved fast, desperate, forming the ASL signs for hurt and scared and home bad. Mrs. Hayward stared at her for 11 seconds. Lily counted. Then the woman smiled the way adults smile when they've already decided not to understand, patted Lily's head, and said out loud, words Lily couldn't hear but could read on her lips with brutal clarity, "You're fine, sweetheart." She wasn't fine. She had never been fine. The caseworker assigned to Lily's file was a 26-year-old woman named Dana Rios, who carried 63 active cases and slept 4 hours a night in a studio apartment that smelled like instant ramen and anxiety. Dana had visited the Mercer home twice. Both times, Wade met her at the door in a clean polo shirt with a cup of coffee and a rehearsed smile. Both times. Lily sat on the couch in long sleeves with her hands folded in her lap, eyes down, perfectly still, the way Wade had taught her to sit when visitors came. Dana noted, "Child appears calm and well-adjusted" in her file, finished her coffee, and left. The burns multiplied. And Lily learned the most dangerous lesson a child can learn, that asking for help is pointless. So when she ran that night, barefoot, freezing, her left eye swollen shut from where Wade's knuckle had caught her cheekbone when she dropped a glass of water, she wasn't running toward anything. She was just running away. The way animals do when the cage door accidentally opens. Not with a plan, not with hope, just with the raw, desperate need to be somewhere, anywhere, that wasn't that house. The rain hit her face like needles. Her feet were numb. The park stretched out ahead of her in the dark, shapeless and soaked, and she had no idea that in approximately 90 seconds, her life was going to split in half. Because someone was already there. Rex Grim Cross stood near the east side of the park pond with his hands in the pockets of a leather cut so weathered it looked like it had survived a war. It had. 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 catastrophic mission in Kandahar, and 14 years of silence so heavy it had reshaped the bones of his face into something hard and unreadable. He was 41. 6'2". A scar ran from his left temple down to his jawline, shrapnel from an IED that killed the driver sitting 3 feet from him in a vehicle he'd ordered into that convoy. He never talked about Kandahar, but Kandahar never stopped talking about him. The scar was the visible wound. The invisible ones were worse. Grim hadn't slept more than 3 consecutive hours since 2014. He drank black coffee until his hands shook, then switched to bourbon until they stopped. He smoked too much, ate too little, rode his Harley-Davidson Road King through Portland's rain-soaked streets at 2 in the morning because the engine noise was the only thing louder than the voices in his head, the ones that repeated, over and over, the last radio transmission from Kandahar, Sergeant Torres screaming his name before the line went dead. 2 men died because of a call he made. He carried that weight like a second skeleton. Standing beside him was Eden Cross, 38. Deaf since age 4 from bacterial meningitis, dark hair pulled back tight, eyes the color of rain-washed slate. She wore a leather jacket with the Iron Saints patch on the back, a winged skull gripping a sword, and she moved through the world with the particular stillness of someone who had learned long ago that silence was not the same as weakness. Eden was fluent in ASL. She taught sign language classes 3 nights a week at a community center on Hawthorne Boulevard that smelled like floor wax and old radiators. She had married Grim 6 years ago in a courthouse ceremony where neither of them cried because neither of them had any tears left for anything that wasn't rage or relief. They were not in the park by accident. Every Thursday night, rain or not, Grim and Eden walked the pond loop. It was their ritual. No phones, no noise. Just the 2 of them signing slowly to each other beneath whatever sky Portland decided to throw at them. It was the only hour of the week where Grim's jaw unclenched. The only hour where Eden didn't have to translate the world for someone who refused to listen. Tonight, they were arguing. Eden's hands moved sharp and fast. "You haven't eaten today." Grim's response was slower, heavier. "Not hungry." "That's not what I asked." He looked away. Toward the pond. Toward the rain hitting the surface in overlapping circles that reminded him of bullet impacts on sand. He didn't sign back. Eden watched his profile for a long time. The scar, the hollowed cheeks, the way his shoulders sat too high, like a man permanently bracing for an explosion. She had married a ghost who didn't know he was still alive. Some nights she wondered if he ever would. Then she saw the girl. A small shape emerging from the tree line 50 yards away. Moving fast, stumbling, bare feet on wet grass. Eden grabbed Grim's arm and pointed. He turned. And everything he was, the guilt, the insomnia, the war, went quiet for exactly 1 second. Because something about the way that child moved triggered an instinct older than trauma, older than memory. The way she hunched her shoulders, the way she kept looking behind her, the way her hands clutched those oversized sleeves like armor. He had seen that posture before. In a village outside Kandahar, a boy no older than 8 had walked toward his convoy with that exact same gait. Shoulders curled inward, eyes scanning for threats that were everywhere, hands hiding something that would either save him or destroy him. That boy had been carrying a water jug, not a bomb, just water. But Grim's lieutenant had panicked, and the next 4 seconds changed the rest of Grim's life. He didn't panic now. He stayed still. Eden moved first. She stepped forward slowly, hands visible, palms open, the way you approach something scared and breakable. The girl saw her and froze. Rain streamed down both their faces. For a moment they just stared at each other across 20 feet of wet darkness. Then Eden signed, slowly, gently. "Are you okay?" Lily's eyes went wide, not with fear, with something worse, with the shock of recognition, the shock of seeing her own language, the language that had been ignored, dismissed, waved away by every hearing adult in her life, coming from the hands of a stranger in a leather jacket in the middle of a rainstorm. Her mouth opened. No sound came out. It never did. But her hands moved. 3 signs. Small. Shaking. Barely formed, the way a child signs when she's been punished for signing too many times. "Please, you understand." Eden's breath caught. She turned to Grim. He didn't need translation. He didn't know ASL the way Eden did. He'd learned enough to talk to his wife, stumbling and slow, but he knew those three signs. He'd seen Eden teach them to her students. He'd watched her practice them in the kitchen mirror when she thought he wasn't looking. Please, you understand. Eden knelt in the mud. Rain soaked through her jeans instantly. She didn't care. She signed back, yes, I understand. What's wrong? And Lily, 7 years old, 46 pounds, alone in a city of 700,000 people who had never once listened, did the thing she had been afraid to do for 8 months. She pushed up her left sleeve. The burns were arranged in a pattern, not random, deliberate. Circles the size of cigarette tips pressed into the soft skin of her inner forearm with the kind of precision that only comes from repetition. Some were old, scarred over, white and puckered. Some were fresh, red, raw, glistening in the rain like small wet mouths. Eden stared. Then she looked up at Grim. Something happened to his face. It was subtle. A civilian wouldn't have caught it, but Eden had lived with this man for 6 years. She knew every version of his silence. The tired silence, the drunk silence, the 3 in the morning silence where he sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall like he could see through it to somewhere worse. This was different. This was the silence before violence. His jaw tightened. His hands came out of his pockets. His right hand, the one with the faded tattoo of a skull wrapped in barbed wire across the knuckles, closed into a fist so slowly it was almost mechanical. The tendons in his neck stood out like cables. His eyes didn't blink. They locked onto those burns with the focus of a man sighting a target downrange, and everything soft in him, everything Eden loved, everything that made him human instead of weapon, drained out of his face like water through a cracked foundation. Who did this? He said it out loud. Not signed. His voice was flat, low, the kind of quiet that makes dogs stop barking and strangers cross the street. Eden signed the question to Lily. Who hurt you? Lily's hands trembled. She signed a name. Eden translated it. Wade Mercer, her foster father. Grim nodded once. Just once. The way a man nods when he's already made a decision that cannot be unmade. He pulled out his phone, dialed a number. It rang twice. Deacon. His voice hadn't changed. Still flat, still low. Get the club. Laurelhurst Park, east side, now. A pause. Yeah, bring everybody. He hung up. Eden was already wrapping her jacket around Lily's shoulders. The leather was too big, too heavy, smelling of rain and motor oil and the faint ghost of cigarette smoke. But Lily pulled it tight around her body with both hands and pressed her face into the collar like it was the first safe thing she had touched in months. Maybe it was. Grim crouched down. He was too big for it. His knees cracked. His boots sank into the mud. But he got himself eye level with the girl, and he did something he almost never did. He signed, clumsily, slowly, the way a man signs when the words matter more than the grammar. Nobody hurts you again. Lily stared at him, at the scar, at the knuckle tattoos, at the leather cut with its winged skull and the words Iron Saints stitched across the back in white thread gone gray from years of rain and road dust. She should have been terrified. Everything about this man said danger. Everything about him said violence and darkness, and the kind of life that polite society locked its doors against. But Lily had lived with polite society. Polite society burned her with cigarettes, so she reached out with one small, trembling hand and touched the scar on Grim's face. Just touched it, gently, the way you touch something broken to see if it still works. And Grim, the man who hadn't cried since Kandahar, who had buried 2 soldiers and a marriage and half his soul in Afghan sand, felt something crack behind his sternum that he didn't have a name for. He didn't move. He let her touch the scar. And the rain kept falling. 12 minutes later they came. The sound arrived before they did. A low, guttural rumble that started somewhere beyond the park's tree line and grew like distant thunder rolling closer. Not weather. Engines. The deep chest-shaking throb of V-twin motors being pushed through wet streets at speeds that said urgency without saying emergency. 1 at first, then 2, then 4, then all at once, a wall of sound that made the rain feel quieter by comparison. 8 motorcycles rolled into the east parking lot of Laurelhurst Park in formation. Headlights cut through the downpour like searchlights, throwing long yellow beams across puddles and pavement, and the hunched shapes of men dismounting heavy machines with the practiced ease of people who had been doing this their entire adult lives. Deacon came first, 45 years old, vice president of the Iron Saints Portland chapter. 6'4", 240, a former Marine who'd lost his left hand to a training accident at Camp Pendleton and replaced it with a prosthetic he covered with a black leather glove that he never took off. He walked toward Grimm without speaking, boots splashing through standing water, and read the situation in 3 seconds flat. "How old?" he asked. 7? Deacon closed his eyes, opened them, looked at Lily wrapped in Eden's jacket, and something shifted in his face that was part rage and part something softer, something that looked like memory, though he never talked about what kind. The others followed. Boone, the sergeant-at-arms, built like a refrigerator with a red beard and steady hands that could rebuild a carburetor or calm a frightened horse with equal precision. Judge, the club's unofficial lawyer, a disbarred attorney who still knew more about the legal system than most practicing ones, carrying a coffee thermos that was never actually just coffee. Ratchet, the youngest at 28, covered in tattoos from wrist to throat, an army medic who'd served in Iraq and came home to a country that forgot his name before he cleared customs. Hatch, Dillard, Pike, Monk, 8 men standing in the rain. None of them spoke. None of them needed to. Grimm gave them the short version. Eden filled in what sign language had revealed. Ratchet knelt beside Lily and checked her arms with the clinical gentleness of a man who had treated worse in worse conditions, his face steady and calm even as his jaw tightened at the pattern of the burns. "These aren't accidental," Ratchet said quietly. "Spacing is intentional. He's marking her." "I know what he's doing," Grimm said. The rain intensified. Water streamed off leather and chrome. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed and faded, a sound Portland made constantly, like a city that was always bleeding somewhere just out of sight. Deacon pulled Grimm aside. They stood beneath a Douglas fir that offered no real shelter, just the illusion of it. "You called the cops?" "Not yet." "Grimm." "I said not yet." Deacon studied him. "You thinking about going to that house?" It wasn't a question. It was a warning. Grimm said nothing. But his hands hadn't unclenched since Lily pushed up her sleeve, and Deacon knew what that meant. He'd seen it in Kandahar. He'd seen it in barroom fights and highway standoffs, and one very bad night in Reno that they had all agreed to never mention again. When Grimm's hand stayed closed, someone was about to get opened. "You go to that house," Deacon said carefully, "and it's not rescue anymore. It's assault. And they'll put you inside, and that little girl ends up right back where she started. So what's the play? We do it clean. We call the cops. We document. We protect the kid, and we let the system." "The system did this." Grimm's voice dropped. "The system put her in that house, took the checks, and looked the other way while a grown man burned a 7-year-old with Marlboros. Don't talk to me about the system." Silence. Just rain. Deacon exhaled through his nose. "Then we do it our way. But clean. You hear me? Clean." Grimm looked back at Lily. She was sitting on the park bench now, Eden beside her, signing slowly. The girl's good eye, the one that wasn't swollen, was watching Eden's hands with an intensity that was almost painful to see, like someone dying of thirst watching water pour. "Clean," Grimm said, but his hands were still closed. Deacon made the call. Not 911. He called a number he kept in a burner phone that the club used for situations that required a specific kind of law enforcement. Detective Maria Garcia, Portland PD, Crimes Against Children Unit. She was not friendly to the Saints. She was not unfriendly either. She existed in the gray space between badge and street, where the only currency that mattered was whether or not you were telling the truth. She answered on the 4th ring. "Garcia." "It's Deacon. We have a situation." "Laurelhurst Park, 7-year-old deaf girl. Cigarette burns. Foster home. Name is Mercer." Silence on the line. Then, "Don't touch anything. Don't go anywhere. I'm 20 minutes out." We're not going anywhere." "And Deacon?" "Yeah." "Keep Grimm away from the foster father." She hung up. 23 minutes later, Garcia's unmarked Dodge Charger pulled into the lot, followed by a patrol unit with its lights off. She stepped out in a dark blazer over a wrinkled shirt, badge on her hip, hair pulled back in a knot that had been redone at least twice that day. She was 42, Mexican-American, divorced. She'd worked child cases for 11 years and it had cost her a marriage, most of her friendships, and whatever version of optimism she'd been born with. What was left was efficient, thorough, and deeply tired in a way that sleep would never fix. She walked past the row of parked Harleys without looking at them, past the bikers standing in the rain like statues carved from leather and bad decisions, past Deacon, who nodded once and received nothing in return. She went straight to the girl. Eden translated. Garcia asked questions in a low, steady voice that never changed pitch, never softened to condescension, never hardened to interrogation. She asked them the way you'd ask directions, simply, plainly, as if the answers were just facts instead of horrors. Where do the burns happen? In the kitchen, when he's drinking. How often? Lily held up her hands. Too many to count. Does anyone else live in the house? A woman. She stays in the bedroom. She doesn't come out. Has anyone at school seen the burns? Lily's hands went still. Then she signed one word. Yes. Garcia looked up. Who saw them? Eden translated the answer. A teacher, Mrs. Hayward. Lily had shown her once during lunch. Mrs. Hayward told her to pull her sleeves down. Garcia's expression didn't change, but her pen stopped moving for exactly 2 seconds. That was the tell. In 11 years of working cases that would make most people quit their jobs and move to a different state, that 2-second pause was as close to visible rage as Maria Garcia ever got. She turned to the patrol officer. Get me a warrant for the Mercer residence. Call DHS for an emergency removal order, and find out who the assigned caseworker is. Dana Rios, Grimm said from the shadows. Garcia looked at him. How do you know that? Because we're not the ones who stopped looking. Their eyes met. Something passed between them. Not trust, not yet, but something adjacent. An acknowledgement. The grudging recognition between two people who had both been failed by institutions they were supposed to believe in. Garcia turned back to Lily. I'm going to take you somewhere safe tonight. Eden signed it. Lily watched. Then she signed back. And Eden's face changed. Something cracked in the composure she'd been holding together since the moment she saw those burns. What did she say? Garcia asked. Eden's voice was quiet, controlled, the way voices get when the alternative is falling apart. She said, That's what the last one told me too. Nobody spoke. Rain filled the silence the way it always does in Portland, relentlessly, indifferently, without any interest in the damage it's falling on. Grimm stepped forward. She stays with us tonight. That's not how this works, Garcia said. I don't care how it works. I care that she's breathing tomorrow. Mr. Cross, it's Grimm. Mr. Cross, I understand your concern, but there are procedures. Your procedures put cigarettes out on a deaf kid. So respectfully, Detective, I'm going to need better procedures. Garcia stared at him. The scar, the leather, the fists. She had dealt with bikers before. She had dealt with vigilantes and concerned citizens and violent men who dressed their anger up as protection. But something about the way Grimm stood, not aggressive, not posturing, just immovable, like a man who had already calculated every consequence and accepted them all, made her pause. She looked at Lily. The girl was gripping Eden's hand with both of hers, face pressed against the woman's arm, and she hadn't let go since the jacket went around her shoulders. The hold wasn't casual, it was structural. Remove Eden, and the girl would collapse. One night, Garcia said, I'll have a social worker at your address by 9 a.m. Fine. And Cross? Yeah? If Wade Mercer turns up with so much as a paper cut between now and then, I'll arrest you myself. Grimm looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded, slowly, the way a man nods when he's making a promise he isn't sure he can keep. They took Lily to the Crossroads Motel on Sandy Boulevard. Not because it was nice, but because it was close, and Grimm had an arrangement with the night manager, a retired trucker named Sal who asked no questions and accepted cash. Room 14. Ground floor. Orange carpet, a radiator that clanked every 40 seconds, and a window that faced the parking lot where 8 Harleys now sat in a row like sentries. Eden ran a bath. Warm, not hot. She tested it with her elbow the way she'd seen mothers do in movies, because neither she nor Grimm had ever been parents, and everything about tonight felt like being thrown into deep water without learning how to swim first. She helped Lily undress and found more burns. On her back, on her ribs, on the soles of her feet, which explained why she had been running barefoot. Shoes hurt too much. Eden documented each one with her phone camera. Steady hands, steady breath. She'd fall apart later, in the truck, where Grim couldn't see. Not now. Lily sat in the bath and didn't move. She stared at the water the way children stare at things when they've stopped expecting the world to be anything other than what hurt them last. Her hands were still. Her face was blank. 7 years old and already fluent in the language of disconnection. The ability to leave your body while your body stays in the room. Eden sat on the bathroom floor beside the tub and signed slowly. You're safe. Nobody is coming. You're safe. Lily's good eye focused on her, slowly, like a camera adjusting after being pointed at darkness for too long. She signed back one word. Promise? Eden hesitated, because she was a woman who did not make promises she couldn't keep, and she knew, the way anyone who has ever been inside a system knows, that safety is not a thing you can guarantee. Not tonight, not tomorrow. Not in a state where 73% of foster care complaints go uninvestigated and deaf children are placed in homes where nobody speaks their language because silence is cheaper than interpreters. But she looked at that girl. At the burns and the swollen eye and the feet too damaged to wear shoes, and she signed back with hands that shook only slightly. Promise. Out in the parking lot, Grim smoked his third cigarette in 20 minutes, leaning against his Road King with his arms crossed and his eyes on the road. Deacon stood beside him. Neither spoke for a long time. The rain had eased to a steady drizzle that turned the motel's neon sign into a bleeding smear of pink and blue against the wet concrete. I'm going to kill him, Grim said. No, you're not. You didn't see her feet, Diak. And you don't get to see the inside of a cell while that girl needs you standing up. Grim took a drag, held it, let the smoke curl out between his teeth. How many kids you think are out there right now? Same situation, different house. Nobody signing, nobody checking. Deacon didn't answer. Not because he didn't know, but because the answer was the kind of number that makes you want to burn something down, and they had already agreed to do this clean. A phone buzzed. Grim looked at the screen. It was a text from a number he didn't recognize. 6 words that changed everything. She's not the only one. Grim stared at the message. The rain dripped off his jaw. The neon sign buzzed and flickered. Somewhere inside room 14, a deaf girl was learning how to feel safe for the first time in her life. And somewhere out there, in another house, in another city, another child was waiting in the dark. Grim showed the phone to Deacon. Deacon read it. Then he looked up at Grim with the expression of a man who just realized the storm they were standing in was only the beginning. Who sent this? Deacon asked. Grim shook his head. I don't know. The phone buzzed again. A second message, this time with a name, an address, and 2 words that made the blood drain from Deacon's face. He's worse. The name on the screen was Marcus Reed, 9 years old, deaf since birth. Last known address, a group foster home on River Road in Eugene, 110 miles south of the motel where Lily Vale was sleeping for the first time without flinching. Grim read the message 3 more times. The blue glow of the phone lit the underside of his jaw and turned the rain on his face into something that looked like sweat. Deacon stood beside him with his prosthetic hand gripping the handlebar of his softail and his real hand hanging loose at his side, the way it hung when he was thinking hard and didn't want anyone to know. Could be bait, Deacon said. Could be. Could be someone trying to pull us out of position, get us on the road, get the girl alone. Could be. You're going anyway. Grim didn't answer. He pocketed the phone and looked at the motel door. Room 14. The light was still on behind the curtain. Eden was in there with Lily, probably sitting on the floor next to the bed, probably signing slow comfort into the dark the way she did when the world got too loud for everyone except her. He thought about knocking, telling her. But Eden would want to come, and someone needed to stay with Lily, and this was the kind of decision that got harder the more people you explained it to. I need 2 riders, Grim said, at 3 in the morning. At 3 in the morning. Deacon exhaled. It came out as vapor in the cold. Boone's asleep in his truck, Ratchet's still up, saw him walking the perimeter 10 minutes ago. That's enough. Grim. Deacon stepped closer. close enough that their breath mixed in the cold air between them. We agreed clean. We shook on it. You ride to Eugene in the middle of the night on an anonymous tip, and clean goes out the window. Garcia finds out, she pulls her protection. DHS finds out, they come for Lily. You understand what I'm saying? I understand what you're saying. But you don't care, Ika. I care about a 9-year-old kid sitting in the dark right now with burns on his body and nobody who speaks his language. Grimm's voice was low enough that the rain almost ate it. I've been that kid, Diak. Different scars, same dark. You want to tell me to wait for the system? Go ahead, but the system had its chance. Deacon stared at him. The neon sign buzzed and went pink, then blue, then pink again, painting their faces in alternating bruise colors. He wanted to argue. He had 6 good arguments lined up. Legal, tactical, strategic, personal. Every one of them was correct. Every one of them was useless against a man who had already crossed a line that only existed in his own head. I'm coming with you, Deacon said. No, you stay here. You protect this door. Grim, this door, Deacon. Nothing else matters until I get back. If I don't get back by dawn, you call Garcia and tell her everything. The message, the name, the address, all of it. And if you don't get back at all? Grim pulled his keys from his jacket. The metal clinked against his rings. Then Eden knows what to do. He said it the way he said everything that mattered. Flat, final, like a nail being driven into wood. Then he walked across the parking lot to where Ratchet was standing under the awning of the ice machine, smoking a hand-rolled cigarette that smelled like cloves and bad decisions. Get up, Grim said. We're riding south. Ratchet looked at him. 28 years old, tattoos crawling up his neck like ivy on a condemned building. He had a face that could look either 17 or 40 depending on the light, and right now, under the flickering fluorescent of the ice machine alcove, he looked like a kid who'd been woken up in the middle of a nightmare he was already used to. How far south? Eugene. Tonight? Right now. Ratchet dropped his cigarette into a puddle. It hissed once and died. He didn't ask why. In the Iron Saints, you didn't ask why when Grim said move. You moved. The why came later, usually in the form of a story you'd spend the rest of your life trying to forget. They woke Boone. He was sleeping in the cab of his truck with a wool blanket and a paperback western folded open on his chest. He came awake the way former combat soldiers do, fully, instantly, with his hand already reaching for something that wasn't a book. Grim gave him 30 seconds of explanation. Boone listened, pulled on his boots, and said one word. Okay. 3 Harleys rolled out of the Crossroads Motel parking lot at 3:17 in the morning. The sound cracked the sleeping neighborhood open like a gunshot, and then faded into the wet hiss of tires on the I-5 south on-ramp. The road stretched ahead of them in the dark, rain-slick and empty, lined with Douglas fir that stood like black walls on either side. Grim rode point, Ratchet on his left, Boone trailing by a bike length, watching the mirrors for headlights that didn't belong. Nobody spoke. The helmets had no comms. The only language was engine speed and hand signals, and the particular cadence of 3 motorcycles moving through the night with the urgent, synchronized purpose of men who had done this before, in places with worse roads and higher stakes. Grim's mind was not on the road. It was in Kandahar. He tried to keep it out. He always tried. But nighttime rides did something to his head. The vibration of the engine, the isolation of the helmet, the way the road ahead narrowed into a single vanishing point in the dark. It pulled him back. Always back. To the convoy. To the decision. To the moment he looked at the map and chose the northern route because it saved 11 minutes, and 11 minutes later. Sergeant Dominic Torres and Private First Class Angela Webb were dead in a burning Humvee, while Grim crawled through sand with shrapnel in his face and their screams lodged in his skull like bullets that never exited. He had been their commanding officer. He had given the order. And for 10 years, he had lived with the question that never got quieter, no matter how many miles he put on the odometer. What kind of man gets people killed and keeps breathing? The answer, he suspected, was the kind of man who rides to Eugene at 3 in the morning on an anonymous tip because he cannot, physically, constitutionally, at the level of whatever broken wiring holds his nervous system together, allow another child to spend one more night in silence while the adults responsible for protecting them fill out paperwork and go home. He wasn't doing this because he was brave. I was doing this because the alternative was sitting in that motel parking lot with the knowledge that he could have moved and didn't. And he had already lived that version of himself once. It killed 2 people. They reached Eugene at 5:08. The rain had shifted from Portland's angry downpour to something thinner, colder, a Willamette Valley mist that sat on everything like wet gauze and turned streetlights into smeared halos. The city was still asleep. The address from the text led them to a neighborhood on River Road, working class, flat-roofed duplexes, and chain-link fences in yards where car parts outnumbered children's toys 3-1. The house was the last one on the block. Single story. Gray siding gone green with moss. A porch light that had burned out and never been replaced. 2 cars in the driveway. A rusted Chevy Cavalier and a white state-issue sedan with a DHS parking sticker on the dashboard. Grimm killed his engine half a block away. Ratchet and Boone followed. They walked their bikes to the curb and dismounted in the mist like men stepping onto a beach they expected to be mined. "State car," Boone said. "I see it." "DHS doesn't make house visits at 5 in the morning. "No," Grimm said. "They don't." They stood there. 3 bikers in leather and road grime, breath coming in white puffs, staring at a house where something was wrong enough that the state of Oregon had sent someone in the dark. Grimm reached for his phone. The anonymous number had gone silent. No more messages, just the original 2, glowing on the screen like a dare. "What's the play?" Ratchet asked. "We watch. We just watch. Until we know what we're watching." They waited. 20 minutes, 30. The mist thickened. The houses stayed dark. A dog barked somewhere 3 streets over and stopped. Ratchet shifted his weight and cracked his knuckles. A nervous habit he'd picked up in Iraq when patrols went too long without contact and the silence started feeling like a trap. Then the front door opened. A woman came out, mid-50s, gray hair cut short. She wore a wool coat over what looked like pajamas and carried a leather portfolio under one arm. She walked to the state sedan with the kind of fast, deliberate stride that people use when they want to leave before someone sees them leaving. She didn't look around. She didn't check her phone. She got in, started the engine, and backed out of the driveway with her headlights off. Headlights off. At 5:30 in the morning, a woman driving a state vehicle backed out of a foster home driveway with her headlights off. "You see that?" Boone said. "I saw it." "That ain't a welfare check." "No," Grimm said. "It's not." He memorized the plate. He didn't write it down. Years of operational habit. Numbers went into his head and stayed there like ammunition in a magazine. Ready, ordered, waiting. They waited another 10 minutes. Then Grimm crossed the street. Boone grabbed his arm. "We said watch." "I watched. Now I'm looking." "Grimm, stay here. If I'm not out in 5, call Garcia." He didn't wait for agreement. He moved across the wet grass in the way that Afghanistan had taught him. Weight forward, footsteps rolling heel to toe, eyes scanning windows and corners, and the particular angles where threats hide when they don't want to be found. The house was quiet. The kind of quiet that wasn't peaceful. The kind of quiet that was holding its breath. He went to the side window. Looked in. A living room. Brown carpet. A television left on, volume too low to hear through the glass. Light flickering across a couch with stained cushions and a folded blanket. Empty beer bottles on a coffee table. An ashtray. The smell wouldn't reach him through the closed window, but he could imagine it. Stale smoke, stale beer, the particular chemical sweetness of a house where nobody opens the windows because the air inside has already given up. Then he saw the boy. Sitting on the floor in the corner of the room, back against the wall. Knees drawn up to his chest, arms wrapped around his shins. A thin black boy with close-cropped hair and a face that should have been soft and round with childhood, but was instead drawn tight in the way faces get when they've been flinching for too long. He was wearing a t-shirt 2 sizes too small. His arms were visible. Grimm saw the marks. Not cigarette burns this time. These were different. Welts. Long parallel welts across both forearms, the kind left by something thin and flexible. A belt, a cord, a switch. Some were fresh enough that they looked wet in the television's light. The boy wasn't moving. He wasn't sleeping. I was sitting in that corner the way Lily had sat in the bathtub. Present in body, absent in everything else. staring at nothing with the practiced vacancy of a child who has learned that the safest place to be is nowhere. Grimm's hand went to the window frame, then he stopped, because the boy's hands were moving, small, slow, repetitive. He was signing to himself, the way some hearing children talk to themselves when they're alone, murmuring, repeating, working through something too big for their bodies. But this was silent. This was a deaf child in a dark room, signing the same phrase over and over into air that nobody was reading. Grimm couldn't read it from this angle. His ASL wasn't good enough for distance and bad light. But the rhythm was wrong, too fast, too tight, like a stutter, like a loop, like a mind stuck on one thought and unable to get past it. He pulled out his phone. His hands were shaking, not from cold, from something older, something that lived in his chest where his heartbeat should have been steady and wasn't. He texted Deacon. Found him. It's bad. The reply came in 4 seconds. How bad? Lily bad. Maybe worse. A pause. Then, don't go inside. Grimm stared at the message. He looked at the window. The boy hadn't moved. The television flickered. Somewhere in the back of the house, a light turned on, a hallway, a bathroom, and the boy's entire body went rigid. His hands stopped signing. His head dropped between his knees. He made himself as small as possible in that corner, and Grimm watched it happen with the exact same feeling he'd had in Kandahar when the radio started screaming, and he knew, with the crystalline, terrible clarity of a man watching disaster unfold in real time, that he was about to witness something he could not undo. A man appeared in the hallway, large, white undershirt, holding a beer at 5:40 in the morning. He stood there looking at the boy in the corner, and even through a dirty window, from 20 feet away, Grimm could read the posture, the tilt of the head, the way the man's free hand flexed and relaxed, like a machine warming up. Grimm's phone buzzed. Deacon again. Grimm. Don't go inside. Don't go inside. He was already moving toward the front door. Boone intercepted him at the porch steps. 260 pounds of red-bearded sergeant-at-arms, arms spread wide, blocking the way with his body because words wouldn't work and they both knew it. Move, Grimm said. No. Boone, I swear, you go through that door, you catch a B&E charge, assault charge if you touch him. The kid goes into emergency custody and ends up in another house just like this one while you sit in county with no bail. Is that what you want? Grimm's breath came hard and ragged. Steam poured from his mouth. His hands were shaking badly now, not from the cold, from the effort of not moving, from the physical, muscular discipline of keeping his body still when every nerve in it was screaming the same word, go. There's a man in there with a belt, Grimm said, and there's a 9-year-old kid who can't call for help. I know. He's hurting him right now. You don't know that. I saw the marks, Boone. I saw them. And Garcia will see them too, in the morning, with a warrant and a badge and the legal authority to put that man in a cage where he belongs. You don't have any of those things, Grimm. All you have is fists and a record and a temper that's going to get a child taken away from the only people trying to save him. The silence between them lasted 7 seconds. Each one felt like an hour. Then, from inside the house, through the thin walls and the single-pane windows and the mist-soaked air of the Willamette Valley, came a sound. A thump, dull, heavy. The sound of something, someone, hitting a wall. And then nothing. Grimm looked at Boone. Boone looked at Grimm. In the space between their eyes, an entire conversation happened without a single word. Every argument Boone had just made was correct. Every legal, tactical, strategic reason for standing still was valid, and none of it mattered, because they were standing on the porch of a house where a child was being beaten at 5:40 in the morning, and the system, the great lumbering, well-intentioned machine of bureaucracy and badges and filing cabinets, was asleep. Call 911, Grimm said. Tell them you hear domestic violence. Boone understood. He pulled his phone. He dialed. He reported what he heard. The thump, the silence, the address on River Road, and gave a fake name. The dispatcher said officers were being sent. Grimm stepped off the porch. He walked back to the window. The boy was no longer in the corner. The television still flickered. The man was gone. The hallway light was still on. Ratchet appeared at his elbow, silent as smoke. Where's the kid? Ratchet asked. I don't know. That's not good. No. They waited. 8 minutes, the longest 8 minutes of Grimm's life since Kandahar, and for the same reason, he was standing still while someone needed him, and the distance between action and consequence had collapsed into something so thin he could feel it vibrating in his teeth. The patrol car arrived with its lights on. 2 officers. They knocked on the door. The man in the undershirt opened it with a confused expression and a fresh beer. Words were exchanged. The officers went inside. 3 minutes later, one of them came back out and spoke into his radio. An ambulance was called. Grimm didn't move. He watched from across the street, flanked by Ratchet and Boone, 3 leather-clad silhouettes standing in the mist, while red and blue lights strobed across wet pavement, and the organized chaos of emergency response unfolded in the pre-dawn dark. They brought the boy out on a stretcher. Marcus Reed, 9 years old, 38 pounds lighter than he should have been. A dislocated shoulder and 3 cracked ribs and welts across his back. So numerous the paramedic counted them out loud and stopped at 40. 40. Grimm listened to that number and felt something in his chest rearrange itself. Not break, because it was already broken, but shift, the way tectonic plates shift before an earthquake. The kind of internal movement that doesn't make noise when it happens, but changes the landscape permanently. His phone buzzed. The anonymous number again. 1 message. There are more. Grimm stared at it. The ambulance pulled away. The officers went back inside. The man in the undershirt was on the porch in handcuffs now, and his face, caught in the red and blue strobe, showed nothing. No remorse. No fear. Just the blank bovine expression of a man who had been caught doing something he'd done so many times it no longer registered as wrong. Grimm texted back for the first time. Who are you? The reply took 30 seconds. Someone inside. Inside what? The machine. Then a third message. Longer. A name Grimm had never heard before, but would spend the next 2 weeks learning to hate with a precision that bordered on religious devotion. Margaret Keller. DHS Region 4 Administrator. She's the one placing deaf kids in these homes. She's the one bearing the reports. She's the one getting paid. Paid by who? No response. Paid by who? Nothing. The phone stayed dark. They rode back to Portland in gray dawn light that turned the freeway into a smear of silver and exhaust. Grimm's jaw ached from clenching. His hands were numb on the grips. He hadn't slept in 31 hours and couldn't feel it. The adrenaline had replaced fatigue the way floodwater replaces everything that was on the ground before it arrived. Back at the Crossroads Motel, Deacon was standing in the parking lot with his arms crossed and a look on his face that said everything he didn't. Well, Deacon asked. 9-year-old, 3 cracked ribs, dislocated shoulder, 40 welts. Deacon closed his eyes. And that's not the worst part, Grimm said. What's the worst part? Grimm showed him the messages. All of them. The anonymous number. Margaret Keller. The phrase that hung in the air like smoke from a fire you can't see yet. She's the one getting paid. Deacon read each message twice. Then he handed the phone back and said 3 words that Grimm had heard only once before in their entire history. In Kandahar, the night before the convoy, when Deacon saw the intelligence report and understood before anyone else that they were being sent into something they might not come back from. We need church. In the Iron Saints, church wasn't prayer or ceremony. It was a full-table meeting, every patched member, every officer, doors closed, phones off. The kind of conversation where decisions get made that can't be unmade, and silence counts as a vote. They called it for noon. The Saints Clubhouse sat behind an auto body shop on Foster Road in southeast Portland, a converted warehouse with concrete floors, fluorescent lighting that turned everyone the same shade of yellow, and a long oak table that had been salvaged from a demolished church and carried a century of scars across its surface. 14 chairs around it. Not all of them filled today. 2 members were out of state. One was in rehab and wouldn't answer his phone, but 11 men sat down at that table at 12:07 on a Friday afternoon, and the room went quiet. The way rooms go quiet when the people inside them know that what happens next will change everything. Grimm stood at the head of the table. He didn't sit. He never sat during church. A habit from the military. Briefings were delivered standing, because sitting made you comfortable, and comfortable men made lazy decisions. He told them everything. Lily, the Burns, Eugene, Marcus, the anonymous messages, the name Margaret Keller, the DHS vehicle with its headlights off at 5:30 in the morning, The phrase, "There are more." When he finished, the room stayed quiet for 11 seconds. Grimm counted. He always counted silences the way other people counted money. Carefully, because the value mattered. Then Judge spoke first. He always spoke first. Disbarred 3 years ago for contempt of court. He'd told a family court judge that his ruling was procedurally correct and morally criminal, and the Bar Association agreed with the judge. Now he ran a small consulting firm out of a strip mall on Barber Boulevard and drank whiskey from a thermos that he called coffee, with a straight face that nobody challenged. "Margaret Keller," Judge said, rolling the name around his mouth like something sour. "Region 4 Administrator, that covers foster placements for Lane, Lynn, Benton, and Lincoln counties. She's been in that seat for 9 years. Connected. Political donor. She sits on 2 state advisory boards and has the governor's direct line." "How do you know that?" Boone asked. "Because I did my homework on the drive over. Something some of us should try before riding to Eugene at 3 in the morning." He didn't look at Grimm. He didn't need to. "What's the play?" Hatch asked from the far end. Hatch was 61, the oldest saint, a Vietnam-era Navy veteran who had been riding since before most of the table was born, and spoke with the quiet authority of a man who had survived 3 wars and considered all of them stupid. "The play is we go public," Grimm said. "We get the evidence. We find out how many kids she's placed. We find out who's paying her, and we burn it down." "With what evidence?" Judge leaned back. His chair creaked. "An anonymous text from a number you can't verify? The word of a 7-year-old who hasn't been forensically interviewed yet? A 9-year-old in a hospital in Eugene who you reached through illegal surveillance?" "Grimm, I love you, but a first-year law student would tear this apart before lunch." "So we get more." "From where?" "From inside. The source said they're inside the machine." "The source is anonymous. The source could be anyone. It could be Keller herself, setting a trap. It could be a reporter farming a story. It could be a cop looking to burn us for B&E in Eugene." The table shifted. Chairs creaked. Someone cracked their knuckles. The fluorescent lights hummed the way they always did. A low, persistent drone that lived in the walls of the building like a headache that never fully arrived. "We don't burn," Deacon said. His prosthetic hand sat flat on the table, the black glove motionless. His real hand held a pen that he turned end over end, a tic he'd developed during long briefings at Pendleton. "We protect. That's what we do. We ride to schools, we stand at courthouses, we put bodies between bad people and children. We don't play detective. We don't play journalist, and we sure as hell don't go to war with the state of Oregon." Grimm looked at him. Something moved behind his eyes. Not anger, not yet, but the precursor to it. The low tremor before the quake. "Deak, there are kids. There are always kids. And we have always done this the right way. We bring attention. We pressure. We advocate. We don't steal files. We don't stalk DHS employees. And we don't make decisions at 3 in the morning based on texts from strangers. We made a decision at 3 in the morning and saved a boy's life. We got lucky. Next time, we might not." Grimm stared at him across the table. The room felt smaller. The fluorescent lights felt closer. Every man at that table had seen this before. The moment when Grimm and Deacon stopped agreeing, which happened exactly as often as it needed to, and never more. Deacon was the brake. Grimm was the engine. The club existed in the tension between them, and when that tension pulled too tight, things broke. "I'm calling for a vote," Grimm said. Deacon's jaw tightened. "On what?" "On whether the Iron Saints commit to a full investigation of Margaret Keller and the placement of deaf children in abusive foster homes across Region 4. That's not our mission. Our mission is protecting children. These children need protecting. Our mission is protecting children within the boundaries of the law." The law put cigarettes out on Lily Vale. The room went dead silent. Ratchet was the first to raise his hand. Then Boone. Then Hatch, slowly, with the deliberate weight of a man who understood that what he was raising his hand for was more than a vote. Pike followed. Monk. Dillard, 6'4". Judge abstained, staring at the ceiling like it owed him money. Deacon sat with both hands flat on the table, the pen still, his face unreadable. He didn't raise his hand. He didn't speak. After a long moment, he looked at Grimm and said, very quietly, "You're going to get someone killed." "Maybe." "And you can live with that?" The question hung in the fluorescent air. Every man at the table knew what it really meant. Not, Can you live with it in the abstract? But can you live with it again? After Torres, after Webb, after Kandahar, after every night you've spent staring at the ceiling, replaying the decision that put two people in the ground. Can you carry more weight? Grimm's answer was quiet, honest. The most honest thing he'd said in 10 years. No, but I can't live without trying either. Deacon nodded. Not in agreement. In acknowledgement. The nod of a man who has just watched someone he respects walk toward a cliff and decided to follow anyway. Not because the cliff isn't real, but because letting them go alone would be worse. Then we do it together, Deacon said. And when it goes wrong, and it will go wrong, nobody rides alone. The table settled, the vote was logged, the meeting was over. But Grimm didn't move from the head of the table, because his phone had buzzed one more time, face down on the oak surface. And when he turned it over, the message on the screen made every sound in the room, the humming lights, the dripping pipes, the settling of old wood, fall away into nothing. It was a photograph. A young woman, mid-20s, dark hair, professional clothing. She was sitting at a desk surrounded by files, DHS files, with the state seal visible on the folders. Her eyes were wide, scared, the kind of scared that people look when they've been caught doing something brave. Beneath the photo, one line of text. This is Amy Brennan. She works inside Keller's office. She's been copying files for 3 months, and Keller just found out. Grimm looked at Deacon. Deacon looked at the photo. And somewhere in Salem, 47 miles away, a 26-year-old caseworker named Amy Brennan sat in her car in the DHS parking garage, hands shaking on the steering wheel, watching her rear-view mirror as Margaret Keller's black SUV pulled in 2 spaces behind her and the engine stayed running. Amy Brennan's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She sat in her 12-year-old Honda Civic in the DHS parking garage in Salem with the engine off and the windows fogging from her own breath. The garage was underground, concrete walls, fluorescent tubes that cast everything in that sick yellow-green light that makes living people look like corpses. 3 floors below street level, no cell signal. She'd tried twice already. The bars disappeared the moment she pulled past the security gate, and now her phone sat in her lap showing no service, like a verdict. Behind her, 2 spaces back, Margaret Keller's black Chevy Suburban sat idling. The headlights were off. The engine was running. Amy could see the exhaust curling from the tailpipe in the cold underground air, rising and dissolving like something trying to escape. She had been sitting here for 4 minutes. It felt like 40. Amy Brennan was 26 years old, 5'5", 118 pounds. She had graduated from Portland State with a degree in social work because her younger brother had been deaf and the system had failed him so completely that by the time someone noticed, he was 13 years old and had not spoken, signed or otherwise, to another human being in 9 months. He survived, barely. He lived in a group home in Medford now, and Amy called him every Sunday at 7 p.m. and signed through a video relay service while he stared at the screen with the particular blankness of a person who had learned to endure rather than live. She had taken the DHS job to fix the machine from inside. 3 months ago, she discovered the machine was not broken. It was working exactly as designed. It started with a filing discrepancy. A placement report for a deaf child in Lane County that listed a foster family as certified ASL competent, which Amy knew was false because she had visited that home and the foster parents didn't know the sign for hello. She flagged it. Her supervisor, a middle-aged man named Gerald Voss who smelled like breath mints and regret, told her it was a clerical error. She accepted that. Then she found another one. And another, 7 discrepancies in 3 weeks, all involving deaf children, all listing foster families as language qualified when they weren't, all signed off by the same regional administrator, Margaret Keller. Amy started copying files. Not digitally, Keller's IT team monitored the network, but physically. Old school. She stayed late. She used the copy room on the 4th floor after hours, feeding documents through the machine 1 page at a time, her heart hammering so loud she was certain the security guard 3 hallways away could hear it. She copied placement records, financial disbursements, compliance waivers, and most damning, a series of internal emails where Keller personally intervened to block investigations into foster homes that had already been flagged for abuse. 17 homes, 31 children, 11 of them deaf. Keller wasn't just negligent, she was architectural. She had built a pipeline. Deaf children funneled into homes where nobody could hear them scream. Foster families selected not for competence, but for compliance. State funds dispersed and skimmed through a network of shell contractors that traced back to an LLC registered in Keller's sister-in-law's name. It was elegant in the way that evil things are elegant when they've been designed by someone intelligent enough to know exactly what they're doing. Amy had copied 214 pages before she realized someone was watching. Small things at first. Her desk moved. Not much. Half an inch. But she was the kind of person who noticed half an inch. Because when you grow up with a deaf brother in a system that doesn't care, you learn to read environments the way other people read faces. Every detail matters. Every displacement is a signal. Then her computer logged a remote access session she hadn't initiated. Then Gerald Voss, the Breath Mint supervisor, started asking questions about her hours. Casual questions. The kind that aren't casual. She sent the files to someone she thought could help. A reporter at the Oregonian. The reporter didn't respond for 2 weeks, and when he finally did, the email was one line. We can't move forward with this at this time. She would learn later, much later, that the reporter's editor had received a phone call from someone at the state capitol, and that phone call had contained the word liability 7 times in 3 minutes. So she found another way. The anonymous texts to Grimm had not been an act of courage. They had been an act of desperation. She had found the Iron Saints through an advocacy blog, a small, poorly designed website that documented motorcycle clubs who volunteered for child protection court appearances. She found Grimm's name in a 3-year-old article about the club standing guard at an abuse trial in Multnomah County. She found his number through a contact at the community center where Eden taught sign language. She sent the first message at 2 in the morning from a prepaid phone she bought at a gas station on Commercial Street. And she typed those 6 words, "She's not the only one," with the grim certainty of a woman who had exhausted every legitimate channel and was now operating in the space between law and necessity, where the only compass was her own conscience. And now Margaret Keller was parked behind her in an underground garage with no cell signal, and Amy's hands wouldn't stop shaking. The Suburban's driver's side door opened. Amy watched in the rearview mirror. Keller stepped out. 57 years old, tall, lean in the way that expensive discipline produces. Yoga, Pilates, whatever women with 6-figure salaries and no soul do at 5 in the morning. Silver hair cut to her jawline. A charcoal coat that probably cost more than Amy's monthly rent. She walked toward Amy's car with a stride that was neither fast nor slow. The pace of someone who has already decided what's going to happen and sees no reason to rush. She knocked on Amy's window. 2 knocks. Polite. The way you knock on a door, not a car. Amy rolled the window down 3 inches. Cold garage air poured in. It smelled like concrete dust and exhaust. Amy. Keller's voice was warm. It was always warm. That was the thing about Margaret Keller. She could say the most devastating things in a tone that sounded like a mother reassuring a child before a dentist appointment. Working late again? Just leaving. At 9:30? Long day. Had paperwork. Keller leaned slightly toward the gap. Her perfume came through. Something floral, something expensive, something that had no business existing in an underground parking garage next to a woman whose hands were shaking hard enough to rattle her keys. You know, Amy, I've been reviewing the 4th floor copy logs. The machine keeps a counter. Did you know that? Amy's stomach dropped. Not fell. Dropped. The way a stone drops into a well. Fast, final, with a splash at the bottom that nobody hears. I make a lot of copies, Amy said. You do. 214 in the last 3 months. Mostly after 6 p.m., mostly from files that aren't assigned to your caseload. Silence. 3 seconds. Amy could hear her own pulse in her ears. I've been studying reference materials, Amy said, for a training module. Keller tilted her head. The fluorescent light caught her eyes and turned them into something flat, reflective, like coins. The thing is, Amy, some of those files are sealed, internal review only, and the access log shows your badge in rooms you don't have clearance for. Which is interesting, because Gerald tells me you've been asking questions about Region 4 placements. And now I find your badge swiping into restricted archives at 7:15 on a Tuesday, and I have to ask myself, what is a level 2 caseworker doing with files she shouldn't have, at hours she shouldn't be working, copying documents she has no reason to copy? Amy's right hand drifted toward her bag. The prepaid phone was inside. If she could get to it, if she could get above ground, get a signal. Don't. Keller's voice hadn't changed temperature. It was still warm, still maternal, and that was the most terrifying part. Whatever you're thinking of doing, Amy, don't. I don't know what you're talking about. You're a smart girl. Don't insult both of us. Keller straightened up. She adjusted her coat collar against the garage cold. I'm going to give you one chance. One. You bring me everything you copied, every page, every photograph, every email you sent, every contact you shared them with. You bring it to my office by 9 a.m. tomorrow, and this becomes a personnel matter. A quiet conversation, a resignation letter, maybe a reference, if you're cooperative. And if I don't? Keller smiled. It was the smile of someone who had practiced it in front of mirrors and boardrooms and legislative committees until it was indistinguishable from genuine warmth. Then this becomes something else. She turned and walked back to the Suburban. The door closed. The engine revved once. Then the vehicle backed out, headlights still off, and disappeared up the parking ramp with the slow, deliberate confidence of a predator that doesn't need to chase because it already knows where its prey sleeps. Amy sat in her car for 12 minutes. Then she drove home to her apartment on State Street, locked every lock, pulled every curtain, and called the prepaid phone's last dialed number. It rang 6 times before going to voicemail. She didn't leave a message. She called again, and again, and again. At 10:47 p.m., Grimm answered. Who is this? Amy Brennan. I sent you the texts. I sent you Marcus Reed's address. Her voice was tight, controlled. The voice of someone holding themselves together through sheer mechanical effort. She knows. Keller knows about the files. She confronted me tonight. I have maybe 12 hours before she destroys everything and buries me. Silence on the line. She could hear road noise. Wind. The distant throb of an engine. Where are you? Grimm asked. My apartment, Salem. Are you safe? I don't know. I don't know what she's capable of. Another silence. Then, don't move. Don't open your door for anyone. We're coming. He hung up. Amy stared at the phone. The screen went dark. She put it on the kitchen counter and sat on the floor with her back against the refrigerator, arms wrapped around her knees, in a posture she didn't recognize as identical to the one Marcus Reed had been sitting in when Grimm found him through that window in Eugene. The Iron Saints rode to Salem that night. 4 bikes. Grimm, Deacon, Ratchet, and Boone. They left Portland at 11:15 and hit the I-5 south in formation, engines cutting through night air that smelled like wet asphalt and coming frost. Grimm rode point again. He always rode point. Not because he was president, but because he couldn't stand having someone in front of him. A Kandahar thing, a convoy thing, the irrational but immovable conviction that whoever rides first absorbs the blast. Eden stayed at the motel with Lily. Hatch and Dillard stood watch in the parking lot, one at each end, smoking in silence and checking the road every 30 seconds with the automatic discipline of men who had stood watch in worse places for worse reasons. They reached Amy's apartment at 12:22 a.m. A second-floor walk-up in a beige complex that looked like every other beige complex in every other mid-sized Oregon city. Hollow doors, thin walls, parking lot lights that illuminated nothing and attracted moths. Grimm went up the stairs alone. His boots were heavy on the concrete steps, and the sound echoed in the stairwell like a slow drumbeat that announced something coming. He knocked. Brennan, it's Grimm. Open up. The locks turned. 3 of them. The door opened 4 inches, stopped by a chain. A slice of face appeared in the gap. One eye, part of a mouth, dark hair falling across a forehead damp with sweat despite the cold apartment. How do I know you're real? She asked. You called me. Anyone could have answered that phone. Anyone didn't. I did. And I brought 3 men who've been riding for an hour in 38-degree weather because you said you were in trouble. So either let us in or we'll stand in your parking lot until someone calls the cops, and then we'll have a real interesting conversation. The chain slid free. The door opened. Amy Brennan looked exactly like the photo from the anonymous message, except worse. The professional clothing was gone. She wore sweatpants and a PSU hoodie, and her face had the drawn, gray quality of someone who had been running on adrenaline for 3 months and just felt the tank hit empty. Her apartment was small, clean but sparse. The apartment of someone who worked too much to live in it. A desk covered in papers. A laptop open to a blank screen. a coffee mug with cold dregs, and on the kitchen table, stacked in two precise columns, 214 pages of copied DHS documents held together with binder clips. Grim looked at the stacks, then at Amy. That everything? That's everything I could copy before she locked me out. Placement records, financial disbursements, compliance waivers, and 14 internal emails where Keller personally blocked abuse investigations. There's enough there to open a federal case. Grim pulled a chair from the table and sat down. He didn't ask permission. Deacon came in behind him and stood by the door. Ratchet and Boone stayed outside, one at the bottom of the stairs and one at the parking lot entrance. A perimeter so automatic it looked choreographed. Walk me through it, Grim said. Amy sat across from him. She talked for 40 minutes. Grim listened without interrupting, which was something he had learned in military intelligence debriefs. Let the source talk. Don't steer. Don't react. Don't show them which parts matter because they'll start curating and the curation will kill the truth. He watched her hands, her eyes, the way she sat. Looking for deception, looking for performance, looking for the particular tells that liars carry in their bodies without knowing it. The micro glance to the left, the hand touching the neck, the foot bouncing in a rhythm that doesn't match the narrative. He found nothing. Amy Brennan was telling the truth. And the truth was worse than anything the anonymous texts had suggested. Margaret Keller had been operating a foster placement scheme for at least 6 years. Deaf children were specifically targeted because they couldn't verbally report abuse, couldn't call 911, couldn't testify effectively in a system that didn't provide interpreters unless forced by court order. Foster families were recruited through informal networks, people willing to accept placements without scrutiny in exchange for monthly stipends that the state issued and never audited. The families didn't need to be abusers. Many were simply neglectful, underfunded, overwhelmed, linguistically incompetent. But some were abusers, and Keller knew it, and she placed children with them anyway because the federal reimbursement rate for special needs foster placements was 43% higher than standard placements, and every child in the pipeline was revenue. The money flowed through 3 shell contractors: cleaning services, transportation companies, training providers, all registered to Keller's extended family. The total amount, based on Amy's calculations from the financial documents, was approximately $2.3 million over 6 years. $2.3 million, Grim repeated. His voice was flat. That's what I can document. There's likely more in regions I don't have access to. How many kids? 31 confirmed in Region 4. But I've seen references to similar placements in Regions 2 and 5. If the pattern holds, it could be 60, maybe more. The number sat in the room like a body. 60 children, deaf, invisible, fed into a machine that converted their silence into revenue and their suffering into paperwork that nobody read. Grim stood up. He walked to the window, looked out at the parking lot where Boone stood in the cold with his arms folded and his breath making ghosts in the orange light. He stood there for a long time. Why us? He asked without turning around. You had files. You had evidence. Why not the FBI, the state police, a lawyer? I tried the Oregonian. They killed the story. Try again. Try a different paper. You don't understand. Amy's voice tightened. Keller has connections. She's a political donor. She sits on the governor's advisory board for child welfare. The people who are supposed to investigate her are the same people she has dinner with. I tried the system, Mr. Cross. Every door I knocked on either didn't open or opened to someone who already knew her name. So you called a motorcycle club. I called people who protect children. That's what your website says. That's what the articles say. Grim turned from the window. He looked at her with the expression of a man doing math he didn't want to finish. What we do, he said slowly, is stand outside courtrooms. We ride escorts. We show up at hearings so kids don't have to walk in alone. We don't go to war with state agencies. Then who does? The question landed like a fist on glass. Quiet. Precise. And the crack it left spread in every direction. Deacon shifted by the door. His prosthetic hand flexed inside the glove. She's right, he said, not to Amy, to Grim. And the way he said it, quiet, reluctant, with the weight of a man reversing a position he'd held 6 hours ago at that oak table, changed the air in the room. Grim looked at him. You told me I was going to get someone killed. I still think that. But? But 60 kids, Grim. The silence that followed was the kind that changes organizations. The kind where the thing you used to be gets weighed against the thing you might need to become, and the scale tips so slowly you can hear the metal creak. We take the files, Grim said finally. We make copies, physical and digital. We distribute them to every media outlet in Oregon, not the Oregonian, smaller outlets, television, radio, bloggers, anyone with a platform and nothing to lose. We flood the zone, make it impossible to bury. And Keller? Deacon asked. Keller will come for us the moment the first story runs. I know. She'll use the law. She'll use the press. She'll use everything she has. I know. Are you ready for that? Deacon looked at Amy, then at the stacks of paper on the table, then at Grim. No, he said. But I'm here. They worked until 4 in the morning. Ratchet photographed every page with his phone. Steady hands, proper lighting, the way medics document wounds for evidence. Deacon organized. Amy narrated, explaining the bureaucratic language and pointing out the key passages that would matter to journalists. Grim stood at the window and watched the parking lot, and didn't read a single document. Not because he didn't care, because his job wasn't documents. His job was making sure everyone in this room was still alive at sunrise. At 4:17 a.m., his phone rang. Eden. Hey, he answered. Everything okay? Eden's voice was wrong. Not panicked. Worse than panicked. Controlled in the way that voices get when the panic is so total that the body overrides it with a calm that doesn't belong. Someone was here. Grim's hand tightened on the phone. What do you mean? 20 minutes ago, a car pulled into the lot. Dark SUV. It sat there for 3 minutes with the engine running. Hatch walked toward it. It left. Did he get a plate? Partial. First 3 characters. KLR. KLR. Keller. The room went cold. Not the temperature. Something else. Something that lived in the walls and the air and the space between people when they all understand the same thing at the same time. Get Lily dressed, Grim said. Pack everything. We're moving you tonight. Where? I'll figure it out. Just be ready. He hung up. Looked at Amy. Looked at Deacon. His face was different now. The exhaustion was still there. It was always there. But something underneath it had shifted. The way steel shifts when it's being heated. Not softer, harder, denser, rearranged at the molecular level into something that doesn't bend. She found the motel, Grim said. Amy's face went white. She found Lily. Nobody spoke. The fluorescent light in Amy's kitchen buzzed. Outside, a truck passed on State Street, its engine fading into distance like a sound being swallowed. How? Deacon asked. Doesn't matter how. What matters is she's escalating. She's not trying to bury this anymore. She's trying to eliminate it. Eliminate what? Us? Witnesses. Amy, Lily, Marcus. Anyone who can connect her to the placements. Grim picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. The leather was still damp from the ride down. We need to move. All of us. Tonight. Amy started gathering the files. Her hands had stopped shaking. Something had replaced the fear. Not courage exactly, but the particular numbness that comes when the worst thing you imagine starts happening and your body decides that feeling is a luxury it can't afford. Then her phone rang. Not the prepaid. Her personal phone. The one sitting on the kitchen counter with her real name and her real number and her real life attached to it. She looked at the screen. Gerald Voss. Her supervisor. Calling at 4:22 in the morning. She answered. Put it on speaker. Amy. Voss's voice was thin, reedy. The voice of a man reading from a script he didn't write. I need you to come into the office. Now. Gerald, it's 4 in the morning. I know what time it is. There's been a development. Ms. Keller has filed a formal complaint. Unauthorized access to restricted files. Theft of state property. There's a security review scheduled for 6 a.m. and you need to be present. A security review. With Ms. Keller and legal counsel. Amy, I'm telling you this as your supervisor and as someone who... He paused, swallowed. She could hear the saliva click in his throat. Just come in, please, before this gets worse. Worse how, Gerald? Another pause, longer this time. Then, so quietly she almost missed it. She knows about the bikers, Amy. The line went dead. Amy stared at the phone. Grim stared at Amy. The apartment was so quiet that the refrigerator's hum sounded like an engine. "We go," Grim said. "Right now." They went down the stairs fast, not running. Running draws attention at 4 in the morning, but moving with the coordinated urgency of people who understand that the distance between safety and disaster is measured in minutes, not miles. Ratchet had the file photographs uploaded to a cloud server before they hit the parking lot. Amy carried the physical copies in a canvas bag pressed against her chest like a child. 4 Harleys roared to life in the cold Salem dark. Amy rode behind Grim, her arms wrapped around his waist, her face pressed against the back of his leather cut, the Iron Saints patch inches from her eyes. She had never been on a motorcycle. The vibration was terrifying, the speed was terrifying, the cold was terrifying, but less terrifying than what was behind them. And that calculation, the math of fear, the algebra of choosing the lesser danger, was something she understood intimately, because it was the same math every child in Keller's pipeline had been doing every day of their lives. They rode north, back toward Portland. The sun was still an hour away, and the I-5 stretched before them in the dark like a river flowing toward something they couldn't see yet. Grim's phone buzzed in his jacket. He couldn't check it at 70 miles an hour. It buzzed again. And again. 3 messages in rapid succession, the vibrations traveling through his chest like a second heartbeat. They stopped at a rest area north of Woodburn, 12 minutes from Salem. Grim killed the engine and pulled his phone. 3 messages. All from Detective Garcia. The first, "Call me. Now." The second, "Grim, call me immediately." The third, "Amy Brennan is dead. They found her car in the Willamette River off Independence Highway. Apparent suicide. Call me before you do anything." Grim read the message 3 times. His vision narrowed. The words didn't change. They sat on the screen with the flat, permanent weight of a thing that has already happened and cannot be unhappened. He looked up. Amy Brennan was standing 6 feet away, next to Ratchet's bike, alive. Arms hugging the canvas bag. Breath clouding in the cold. Alive. But according to the Portland Police Department, she was dead. He showed Deacon the phone. Deacon read it. His prosthetic hand closed into a fist so slowly the leather glove creaked. "They staged it," Deacon said. "Yeah. That means they have a body. Or they have a car and a story, which is almost as good." "Yeah. That means as far as the state of Oregon is concerned, Amy Brennan committed suicide tonight. Her files are gone, her testimony is gone, she doesn't exist." "Yeah." Deacon looked at Amy. She was watching them. She couldn't hear the conversation from 6 feet away over the highway noise, but she could read their posture, and she was smart enough to know that whatever was on that phone screen had changed something fundamental. "Tell her," Deacon said. Grim walked to Amy. He held out the phone. She read the message. He watched her face. He watched the blood leave it the way color leaves a photograph left in the sun. Slowly, then all at once, until what remained was not a face but a mask made of skin stretched over something that used to be a person. "I'm dead," she whispered. "To them. My apartment, my brother, They'll tell my brother I killed myself. We'll deal with that." "How? I don't exist anymore. She erased me. In 4 hours she erased me." Her voice cracked. Not loud. Not dramatic. A small, quiet fracture, the way glass cracks when it's been under pressure for too long, and the last degree of temperature change pushes it past tolerance. She didn't cry. She stood in a rest area parking lot at 5 in the morning in 40-degree cold holding a bag of stolen government documents. And she didn't cry, and that was somehow worse than if she had. Grim took the bag from her hands, gently, the way you take something fragile from someone who is about to drop it. "You're not dead," he said. "You're standing in front of me. You're breathing. And as long as you're breathing, Keller hasn't won. She staged my suicide, Mr. Cross." Grim. "She staged my suicide. She has people who can put a car in a river and file a police report in 4 hours. What do you have?" He looked at her. Looked at the 3 men standing behind their bikes in the cold. Looked at the dark highway stretching north toward Portland, where a deaf girl slept in a motel room with a nightlight, and a woman who had promised her safety. Looked at the bag of documents in his hand. 214 pages that represented the only proof that 60 children had been fed into a machine designed to consume them. What did he have? 4 motorcycles. A disbarred lawyer. a one-handed Marine, a combat medic who couldn't sleep, a sergeant-at-arms who read westerns, a deaf wife who carried more weight than any of them, and a past that followed him like a second shadow, whispering the same question it had whispered since Kandahar. What kind of man are you when it matters? I have enough, Grimm said. He didn't believe it. Not fully. Not the way you believe things that are measurably true. But he said it the way a man says things that need to be true in order for the next step to be possible. Like a bridge spoken into existence over a canyon, not because the bridge is real, but because the only alternative is standing still. And standing still was the thing that killed Torres and Webb. He pulled his phone and called Garcia. She answered in half a ring. Where are you? Garcia's voice was razor sharp. The voice of a cop at 5 in the morning who is running on coffee and fury, and the particular outrage of someone who has just been lied to by a system she works for. Woodburn Rest Area. Is Brennan with you? She's standing right next to me. A breath, a long one. The kind of breath people take when the worst-case scenario turns out to be wrong and the relief is so acute it hurts. Then who the hell is in the river? Nobody. Or somebody Keller put there. Either way, it's a message. A message to who? To anyone thinking about talking. Silence on the line, highway noise, the idle of 4 motorcycle engines cooling in the cold. Grimm, listen to me carefully. I ran the Brennan report through dispatch 30 minutes ago. It came in clean, official, filed by Salem PD with a case number and a responding officer's name. Except I called the responding officer, and he says he never filed it. Someone inside Salem PD is working for Keller. Or someone fed the report into the system remotely. Either way, it means Keller has access to law enforcement databases. She can create reports. She can create narratives. She can make people disappear on paper and let the paperwork do the rest. The weight of that settled over the rest area like fog. Not just corruption, not just money. Keller had infrastructure. She had reach. She had the ability to weaponize the very systems that were supposed to hold her accountable. And she had demonstrated, in 4 hours in the middle of the night, that she could erase a living person from official existence with the efficiency of someone deleting a file. I need Brennan in protective custody, Garcia said. No. Grimm, your system just declared her dead. Your system filed a fake police report. Your system put her in a river she was never in, and you want me to hand her back to your system? I'm not the system. You work for it. So did she. That landed. Grimm looked at Amy. She was staring at the highway. Cars were beginning to appear. Early commuters, trucks, the first trickle of a world waking up that didn't know yet what had happened in the dark. I'll bring her to you, Grimm said. In person. At a location I choose. With my people present. And she doesn't go into any database, any safe house, any system that Keller can access. She stays with us. That's not how this works. That's exactly how this works. Because the way it's supposed to work just tried to kill a 26-year-old woman who was the only person brave enough to do your job for you. Garcia didn't respond for 5 seconds. Then, you know she's going to come for you next. She already has. I mean really come for you. Your record, Grimm. Kandahar. She'll find it. She'll release it. Every news outlet in Oregon will run the headline, Violent Veteran Biker Leading a Vigilante Crusade While Under Investigation for Reckless Conduct That Killed 2 American Soldiers. She'll turn you into the story instead of her. Grimm stood in the cold. Amy's breath made ghosts beside him. 4 Harleys ticked and cooled in the dark. The sky was going gray at the edges. Not dawn yet, but the suggestion of dawn, the promise that light was coming whether anyone wanted it or not. Letter, Grimm said. He hung up. And in a corner office in Salem, 47 miles south, Margaret Keller sat behind her desk with a cup of coffee and a phone and a smile that didn't reach her eyes, reviewing a file she had pulled from a Department of Defense database she should never have had access to. The file was 11 pages long. It contained operational reports, disciplinary proceedings, survivor testimonies, and a psychological evaluation that used the phrase command failure resulting in preventable loss of life 4 times. The file was Grimm's, and by morning every reporter in Oregon would have a copy. The headline hit at 6:14 in the morning. Grimm saw it on Ratchet's phone because his own was dead, battery drained from a night of calls and texts, and the particular kind of digital warfare that consumes a device the way fire consumes paper, fast and total and irreversible. They were parked at a truck stop outside Wilsonville, 18 miles south of Portland. Four Harleys lined up against the curb like horses tied outside a saloon in a story where the ending hadn't been written yet. Amy Brennan sat inside the truck stop diner with a cup of coffee she wasn't drinking, staring at the parking lot through a window smeared with grease and condensation. Ratchet held the phone out without a word. The Oregonian. Front page of the digital edition. Above the fold. The headline read, Biker Club Leader's Deadly Military Past Raises Questions About Vigilante Child Advocacy Group. Beneath it, a photograph of Grimm from 12 years ago. Military dress uniform, younger face, fewer scars. The eyes were the same, hollow, fixed, carrying something behind them that the camera caught but couldn't name. Next to the photo, a smaller image. The Iron Saints patch, the winged skull, shot at an angle that made it look menacing instead of protective. And beneath both, 3 paragraphs that dismantled his life with the surgical precision of someone who had been sharpening the knife for weeks. The article named Kandahar, named Torres, named Webb. It quoted unnamed military sources describing a pattern of reckless command decisions and a failure of leadership that directly resulted in the deaths of 2 American service members. It referenced his psychological evaluation, the one marked confidential, the one that should have required a FOIA request and 6 months of bureaucratic processing, but had instead materialized overnight like a weapon pulled from a drawer that was supposed to be locked. It called the Iron Saints a fringe motorcycle organization with alleged ties to vigilante activities. It quoted Margaret Keller. 3 paragraphs. Warm. Measured. The concerned administrator expressing alarm about unvetted individuals inserting themselves into the foster care system and potentially endangering the very children they claim to protect. Grimm read it once. His face didn't change. The scar on his jaw caught the truck stop's fluorescent light and turned white, the way scars do when the skin around them flushes and the damaged tissue stays dead. He handed the phone back to Ratchet. Okay, he said. That was it. 1 word. Ratchet waited for more. Deacon waited for more. Boone stood 3 feet away with his arms crossed and his red beard dripping from the mist, and his eyes locked on Grimm's face the way you watch a structure that might be about to collapse. Okay? Deacon repeated. She made her move. Now we make ours. Grimm, your name is on every news site in Oregon. By noon it'll be national. They're calling you a killer. I am a killer. Grimm said it without inflection, without drama, the way you say the sky is gray. Torres and Webb are dead because of me. That part isn't a lie. The lie is that it has anything to do with Lily or Marcus or the 60 kids Keller fed into her machine. The lie is that my past makes those children less abused. The public doesn't see it that way. The public will see whatever we show them next. He pulled Ratchet's phone and dialed Judge. It rang 3 times. I saw it, Judge said before Grimm could speak. His voice was flat, the voice of a man who had been awake for an hour already, reading and rereading and preparing the kind of legal analysis that a disbarred attorney produces when the law is the only weapon left, and even that weapon has been taken from him. How bad? Grimm asked. Bad enough. She's positioning you as the threat, not her. The article doesn't mention foster placement irregularities, doesn't mention deaf children, doesn't mention financial fraud. It's a character assassination piece, and it's effective because everything about Kandahar is technically accurate. Can we respond? With what? A press release from a motorcycle club? We don't have a platform, Grimm. She has the Oregonian. She has the governor's ear. We have leather jackets and bad reputations. We have the files. Files that were stolen from a state agency by a woman the state currently believes is dead. You want to release those? Every defense attorney in Oregon will argue chain of custody. Keller's lawyers will claim fabrication. And the moment Amy Brennan surfaces alive, the story becomes about who faked her death and why, not about who's abusing children. Silence. Grimm leaned against the truck stop wall. The concrete was cold through his jacket. His body ached. The deep structural ache of a man who hasn't slept in 2 days and has been riding a motorcycle through winter rain for most of them. Then we don't release the files, Grimm said. We release the children. What does that mean? It means we find them. Every kid Keller placed, every home, every address. We show up with cameras and witnesses, and we document what's happening in real time. Not paper, not reports, Not bureaucratic language that nobody reads. Faces, burns, bruises. Silence. We make it impossible to look away. Judge was quiet for 10 seconds. Then, that's either the bravest thing you've ever said or the dumbest. Probably both. You'll need legal observers, journalists who aren't compromised, social workers willing to go on record. And you'll need to do it simultaneously. Hit every house at the same time, because the moment Keller hears you've started, she'll have the rest of the placement scrubbed before sundown. How many addresses do we have? Amy's files list 17 homes in Region 4. I've been cross-referencing with public foster care registries. I can confirm 11. 11 homes. How many writers? We have 14 patched members in Oregon, 3 more prospecting. That's enough. 2 writers per home, plus cameras, plus Amy's documentation to establish the connection to Keller. Grim. Judge's voice changed. Lower, harder. If you're wrong about even one of those homes, if a single family is clean and you show up with bikers and cameras accusing them of abuse, Keller wins. You become the bully, the children become props, and every real case gets buried under the one mistake you made. Then we don't make mistakes. He hung up, looked at Deacon. Call everyone, Grim said. Every patch, every prospect. I want the full club at the shop by noon. And Amy? Grim looked through the diner window. Amy was still sitting at the booth. The coffee was untouched. Her eyes had the glazed, unfocused quality of someone whose brain was processing a reality that her body hadn't caught up to yet. The reality of being simultaneously alive and officially dead, of being hunted by a system she had devoted her career to, of sitting in a truck stop diner in Wilsonville watching her own obituary take shape in the digital ether. Amy comes with us, Grim said. She's the only one who knows the files well enough to match addresses to placements in real time. She's a target, Grim. We're all targets. At least she's a target who knows where the bodies are buried. They rode to Portland. The sky was the color of wet steel, that particular Oregon gray that doesn't brighten or darken, but just hangs there like a ceiling pressing down on everything beneath it. Amy rode behind Grim again, her arms tighter this time, the canvas bag of files strapped to her chest beneath her jacket. She had stopped trembling, not because the fear was gone, but because her body had burned through its supply of adrenaline and replaced it with the dull, chemical calm of total exhaustion. At the clubhouse, the saints gathered. 14 men. Some Grim hadn't seen in months. They came from Portland, Salem, Eugene, Bend, riding through cold and rain because Deacon had used 2 words on the phone that the Iron Saints hadn't heard since the club's founding. All hands. They sat around the oak table. The fluorescent lights hummed. Coffee steamed from mismatched mugs. Nobody had slept enough. Everyone had read the article. The room smelled like leather and wet denim, and the particular tension that exists when a group of men who have chosen to live outside conventional society suddenly finds itself at war with the people who run it. Grim stood at the head. He didn't waste time. You've seen the news. Margaret Keller released my military record to paint us as the threat. She faked Amy Brennan's death to destroy the only witness inside her organization. She sent people to the motel where Lily is staying, and right now across this state, there are children, deaf children, sitting in homes where nobody speaks their language and nobody is coming for them. He paused. Let the silence do its work. Today that changes. He laid out the plan. 11 confirmed homes, 2 writers per home. Every team would carry a camera, a copy of Amy's placement documentation, and a burner phone preloaded with Detective Garcia's direct number. They would arrive at each home simultaneously, 12 noon, not a minute before, not a minute after, and they would document everything: conditions, children, evidence of abuse or neglect. They would not enter without permission. They would not touch anyone. They would not raise their voices. They would stand at the door, and they would bear witness. And if what they found was what Amy's files suggested they would find, they would call Garcia, and they would not leave until someone with a badge arrived to do what should have been done years ago. And if the families don't let us in, Pike asked, we don't need to go in. We need to see. A child with bruises in a doorway is evidence. A child who signs help through a window is evidence. We're not breaking laws. We're breaking silence. And if Keller sends people? Grim looked at him. She will. Then what? Then we don't move. The table was quiet. Men looked at each other. Some of them, the older ones, Hatch, Dillard, had the steady, resigned expressions of men who had been here before in different uniforms and different decades. The younger ones, Ratchet, Pike, a prospect named Cole, who was 23 and had joined the club 6 months ago because his deaf sister had been through the foster system and he couldn't stop thinking about what would have happened if nobody had showed up, looked scared in the honest way that scared people look when they've decided to be scared and move anyway. Vote, Grimm said. Every hand went up, even judges, even Deacons. Deacon said. Grimm nodded. He looked at the table. 14 men, 14 leather cuts with the same winged skull on the back. 14 different reasons for being here, and one shared understanding that some debts can't be paid sitting down. Right at 11, nobody alone, nobody silent, and nobody loses their temper. Keller is waiting for us to be the villains. We don't give her that. The table broke. Men moved to their bikes. Engines started. The shop filled with the deep harmonic rumble of 14 Harleys warming up in the cold, and the sound was something felt more than heard. A vibration in the concrete, in the walls, in the chests of every man standing in that building. Grimm stayed behind. He had one more thing to do. He walked to the back office, a 10 by 12 room with a metal desk, a filing cabinet, and a window that looked out onto the alley where rain was collecting in a pothole deep enough to drown a boot. He closed the door, sat down, and called Eden. She answered on the second ring. I saw the article, she said. Her voice was even. The voice of a woman who had married a man with ghosts and had never once pretended the ghosts weren't there. How's Lily? Asleep. She woke up twice in the night. The second time she signed your name. Grimm pressed his thumb and forefinger against the bridge of his nose. His eyes burned. Not tears. He was past tears and had been for a decade. But the raw physical burn of exhaustion and the particular kind of emotional pressure that doesn't have a release valve. Eden, what they printed about Kandahar. I know what happened in Kandahar. You know my version. I know the truth, which is that you made a decision under fire with imperfect information and 2 people died and you've been dying yourself ever since. The article doesn't change that. Margaret Keller doesn't change that. She's going to use it. She's going to say I'm dangerous, unstable, that I shouldn't be near children. You saved Lily's life. I gave an order that killed 2 soldiers. Yes. Eden's voice didn't soften, didn't harden, stayed exactly where it was, steady, clear, immovable, the voice of the only person on earth who had ever been able to hold Grimm's worst truths without flinching. You did. And you will carry that for the rest of your life. And it will never, cancel out what you're doing now. Grimm sat in the chair. The rain hit the window. The alley was empty. Somewhere in the shop an engine revved and settled, like a heartbeat trying to find its rhythm. We're riding today, he said. All of us. 11 homes. I know. If it goes wrong, it won't. If it goes wrong, Eden, take Lily to your sisters in Boise. Don't stop. Don't call. Just go. Silence. A long one. The kind that couples have when one of them is saying something that sounds like a plan but is actually a goodbye, and the other one knows it but refuses to confirm it by responding the way the script demands. Come home tonight, Eden said. I will. Promise me. He closed his eyes. The words sat in his mouth like a stone, heavy, immovable, too honest to say and too important not to. Promise, he said. He hung up, stood, pulled on his jacket, walked out to the shop floor where 14 bikes waited and 14 men stood in leather and rain and the strange, suspended calm that exists in the minutes before something irreversible begins. Let's go, he said. They rode out at 11:07. Splitting into pairs at designated intersections throughout Portland, each team peeling off toward a different address with a camera, a file, and a phone. Grimm and Deacon rode together, always together, point and brake, engine and anchor, toward the farthest address, a rural property outside Molalla, 40 miles south, where Amy's files indicated a deaf 14-year-old girl named Sarah Wen had been placed 8 months ago with a foster family that had 3 prior complaints and 0 investigations. The road south was empty. The rain had stopped, replaced by a cold so clean it felt like being cut by something invisible. The Harleys growled through it, engines pushing against wind that tasted like pine and diesel and the metallic edge of coming winter. Grim rode with his visor up. The cold hit his face like a slap that never stopped, and he needed it, the way a man who's been underwater needs the shock of surface air to remind him which direction is up. They reached Molalla at 11:51. The house sat at the end of a gravel road lined with Douglas fir, so tall they blocked the sky and turned the lane into a tunnel of green and gray. A manufactured home, white siding gone yellow, a satellite dish on the roof, 2 trucks in the driveway, one running, one on blocks, a dog chained to a stake in the yard that started barking the moment the Harleys appeared and didn't stop. Grim killed his engine. Deacon pulled up beside him. They dismounted. The gravel crunched under their boots in the sudden silence, the absence of engine noise that always felt like the world holding its breath. 12 noon, Deacon said, checking his phone. 12 noon. They walked to the front. Grim knocked. 3 knocks. Hard. The sound of a fist on hollow core particle board, a sound that carries through cheap houses the way truth carries through thin excuses. Fast, undeniable, impossible to pretend you didn't hear. Footsteps inside. Heavy. A lock turning. The door opened. A man. Mid-40s, overweight, flannel shirt untucked over stained jeans. He had the face of someone who had been drinking recently and planned to drink again soon. Reddened, loose, the eyes focused, but not sharp. "Help you?" he said. "We're looking for Sarah Wen," Grim said. The man's face changed. Not much. A flicker. The way a light flickers when the power surges. Too fast to see if you're not watching for it, but unmistakable if you are. "Who?" "Sarah Wen. 14 years old. Deaf. Placed in your care by Oregon DHS 8 months ago." "I don't know what you're talking about." Grim reached into his jacket. Slowly, the man's eyes tracked his hand. Grim pulled out a folded sheet of paper, a copy of the placement record, Amy's handwriting in the margin, the state seal visible at the top. "This document says otherwise. It has your name, your address, and the child's case number. We're here to check on her welfare." "You a cop?" "No." "Social worker?" "No." "Then get off my property." The door started to close. Grim put his boot in the gap. Not aggressive, not violent, just present. The way a wall is present. The way a thing that doesn't move is present. "I'm going to ask you one more time," Grim said. "Where is Sarah Wen?" The man looked at the boot, looked at Grim, looked at Deacon standing 4 feet behind with his arms crossed and his prosthetic hand visible beneath the black glove. Looked at the 2 Harleys in his driveway. The calculation was visible, not intellectual, but animal. The instinctive mathematics of a man measuring threat against bluster and realizing the equation didn't balance. "She's in the back room," he said. "Bring her to the door." "I don't have to." "Bring her to the door, or I call every cop, reporter, and child welfare advocate in Clackamas County, and they bring her to theirs." The man disappeared. 60 seconds passed. 90. Deacon shifted his weight. His real hand drifted toward his belt. Habit, instinct, the body remembering positions the mind tries to forget. Then the man came back. And behind him, a girl, 14 years old, thin, Asian features, black hair hanging loose around a face that was simultaneously young and ancient. The face of a child who had been aged by something that doesn't show up on calendars. She wore a long-sleeved shirt. She stood behind the man with her head down and her hands at her sides and her body angled slightly away from him, tilted like a plant growing away from a heat source. Grim looked at her. He didn't speak. He raised his hands and signed, slowly, clumsily, the limited ASL he had learned from Eden. "Are you okay?" The girl's head came up. Her eyes found his hands. The same shock Lily had shown in the park. The electric full-body recognition of language where language wasn't expected. Her mouth opened, closed. Her hands stayed at her sides. Then her eyes moved. Not to Grim's face. To his left. To the man standing beside her. And in that glance, that single, fractional, involuntary glance, was everything. Every report Amy had copied. Every complaint Keller had buried. Every night in a house where nobody spoke her language and someone hurt her badly enough that she couldn't even raise her hands to ask for help. Because asking for help in front of the person hurting you is not bravery. It's suicide. Grim saw the glance. He understood it. And the thing that happened in his chest was not rage. It was past rage, through rage, on the other side of rage where there's only clarity, cold and bright and absolute. He pulled out his phone, dialed Garcia. Malala address, Sarah Wen. She's here. She's not okay. Send everyone. He hung up. He looked at the man. The man looked back with the particular defiance of someone who knows they've been caught but hasn't yet processed what comes next. You can't prove anything, the man said. I don't have to, Grimm said. She can. And he stepped aside so Deacon could film as he signed to the girl again. Slowly, carefully, the way you extend a hand to someone who has forgotten that hands can be gentle. You can talk now. We understand. At 12:17, Grimm's phone started buzzing with reports from the other teams. Boone and Hatch in Corvallis. A deaf boy, 11. Malnourished. Locked bedroom. Foster mother fled out the back door when she saw the bikes. Pike and Monk in Albany. Twin girls, 9. Both deaf. Bruises on their arms. The foster father tried to shut the door. Pike's boot stopped it. The girls signed their story to a phone camera while the man screamed threats from the kitchen. Ratchet and Cole in Salem. A deaf boy, 6. Alone in the house, no food in the refrigerator. The power had been shut off for non-payment while the foster family collected a monthly state stipend of $1,400. Each report came in like a bullet hitting the same wound. Grimm listened, documented, forwarded everything to Garcia. The detective was already mobilizing county sheriffs, state police, emergency child protective services, the entire bureaucratic apparatus of the state of Oregon, grinding into action with the slow, heavy momentum of a machine that takes forever to start but cannot be stopped once it's moving. But Keller was moving too. At 12:41, Grimm received a call from Judge. She's holding a press conference. Judge's voice was tight, controlled, the voice of a man watching a building catch fire from across the street. Salem, DHS headquarters, 1 o'clock. She's going public. Public with what? She's going to claim you're running a coordinated harassment campaign against licensed foster families. She has statements from 3 families alleging intimidation. She has your military record. She has the faked suicide report on Brennan, which she'll spin as proof that Brennan was unstable. And she has a contact at the state police who's prepared to request an investigation into the Iron Saints for organized criminal activity. She's going on offense. She's going nuclear. If she gets ahead of the story, Grimm, everything we documented today becomes evidence of our aggression, not her corruption. Grimm stood in the gravel driveway in Molalla. Sarah Wen was sitting in the back of a county sheriff's cruiser with a blanket and a female officer who was trying to communicate through gestures that the girl didn't understand. The foster father was in handcuffs. Deacon was on the phone with Garcia. The sky above was gray and flat and endless, the way it always was in Oregon, the way it would always be. A ceiling that never lifted, pressing down on everything beneath it with the patient, indifferent weight of a world that doesn't care who wins. Then we go to Salem, Grimm said. And do what? The same thing she's doing. We go public, but we go with the truth. You'll have to show Amy. I know. The woman the state thinks is dead. I know. If she walks into that press conference alive, Grimm, it proves Keller fabricated the suicide report. It proves Keller has access to law enforcement databases. It proves everything. And it puts Amy on every screen in Oregon with a target on her back. Yes, Grimm closed his eyes. The wind cut through the fir trees and hit his face with a cold that felt personal, like the weather itself was testing him. He thought about Amy in the truck stop diner, her coffee untouched, her eyes focused on something that wasn't in the room. He thought about Lily signing his name in her sleep. He thought about Torres and Webb and the convoy route he chose because it saved 11 minutes and cost 2 lives. Every decision he had ever made led to this one. Call Amy, he said. Tell her what's happening. Tell her the choice is hers. I won't make it for her. And if she says no, then we find another way. But if she says yes, if she's willing to stand up in front of cameras and prove that Margaret Keller tried to erase a living woman to protect a child trafficking operation, then we ride to Salem and we end this today. Judge called back in 4 minutes. She said yes. She sure? She said, and I'm quoting, "That woman killed me once already. She doesn't get to do it twice." Grimm almost smiled. It didn't reach his face. The muscles had forgotten how. But something shifted behind his eyes that was adjacent to it. The acknowledgement of a bravery he hadn't expected from someone who had every reason to run. "Salem," he said. "Everyone. Full club. Now." The Iron Saints converged on I-5 south like tributaries feeding a river. They came from Molalla and Corvallis and Albany and Salem and Portland, joining the freeway in pairs and clusters until 14 motorcycles ran in formation through the Oregon afternoon, engines thundering beneath a sky that had darkened to the color of graphite. Cars pulled aside. Trucks moved lanes. The convoy occupied the left lane at 75 miles an hour, with a presence that was not aggressive but undeniable. The way a storm front is undeniable, the way gravity is undeniable. Amy rode behind Grimm. She had changed into the professional clothes she kept in a bag in the diner. The same blouse and slacks she'd been wearing when Keller confronted her in the parking garage. The same professional armor that a 26-year-old puts on when she's about to walk into a room where every powerful person wants her silent. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. They reached Salem at 12:52, 8 minutes before Keller's press conference. The DHS headquarters sat on a wide street lined with government buildings and bare maple trees. The facade was glass and concrete and institutional ambition, the kind of building designed to communicate authority and transparency while hiding everything that happened behind its walls. In front of it, a crowd had gathered. Reporters, camera crews, protesters holding signs that Grimm couldn't read from the road, police vehicles. 2 news helicopters orbiting overhead like vultures circling something that wasn't dead yet. 14 Harleys turned onto the street. The sound hit the crowd before the bikes did. That deep, unmistakable V-twin growl that makes people stop talking and turn toward its source, the way animals turn toward thunder. Not from fear, but from the instinct to measure something powerful and decide whether to run or stay. They parked in a line along the curb. Every engine died at the same time. Not practiced, just instinct, the way a group of men who have ridden together for years stop breathing at the same moment without being told. The silence that followed was enormous. It pressed against the crowd like a physical force. Grimm dismounted. He pulled his helmet off. The scar was visible, the hollow eyes, the leather cut with its winged skull. Every camera in the crowd swung toward him with the synchronized precision of a firing squad. He didn't speak. He turned and extended his hand to Amy Brennan. She took it, stepped off the bike, stood on the sidewalk in front of the DHS headquarters, alive, visible, undeniable, while reporters who had been briefed on her suicide stared with the particular confusion of people watching reality contradict the narrative they'd been told to believe. "That's Amy Brennan," someone said. A reporter. A whisper that became a murmur that became a wave. "She's alive." "How is she alive?" The crowd shifted, cameras refocused. The energy changed, not calm to chaos, but controlled to unstable, the particular atmospheric shift that happens when a story breaks in real time, and the people covering it realize they're no longer observers but participants. At the top of the steps, behind a podium bristling with microphones, Margaret Keller stood. She had been mid-sentence, something about protecting Oregon's most vulnerable children from outside interference. When the motorcycles arrived, and her mouth was still open, frozen in the particular way that mouths freeze when the brain behind them receives information it cannot process fast enough to form a response. She saw Amy, and the mask cracked. Not much, not enough for the cameras to catch from 50 feet away, but enough for Grimm, who was watching her face the way he watched everything, with the patient, unflinching focus of a man who has learned that the most important moments in any conflict are the ones that happen in the space between words. He saw the crack, the involuntary widening of the eyes, the micro-flinch that traveled across her face like a tremor across water. The split-second recalculation of a woman whose entire strategy had been built on the assumption that Amy Brennan was at the bottom of a river, and who was now watching that assumption walk toward her in professional clothing with 214 pages of evidence in a canvas bag. Amy climbed the steps. Grimm walked beside her, not touching her, not guiding her, just present, the way a wall is present, the way the Iron Saints were present. 14 men standing at the bottom of the steps in leather and rain, and the kind of silence that is louder than anything Margaret Keller had ever said. Amy reached the podium. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't ask for the microphone. She stepped to the cluster of mics and lenses, and she spoke. "My name is Amy Brennan. I am a DHS caseworker for the state of Oregon. Last night, a false police report was filed claiming I committed suicide. I am standing in front of you because that report was designed to silence me and to protect the woman standing behind me. Keller didn't move. Her face had rearranged itself. The mask was back, the warm, concerned, professional facade that had carried her through 9 years of meetings and appointments and fundraising dinners while children burned. But her hands were gripping the podium, her knuckles were white. The tendons in her wrists stood out like cables. I have documents, Amy continued, 214 pages of placement records, financial disbursements, and internal communications proving that Margaret Keller systematically placed deaf children in abusive foster homes, blocked investigations into those homes, and funneled state foster care funds through shell companies controlled by her family. The crowd erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. The protesters surged against the police barriers. The helicopters dropped lower, the rotor wash pushing Keller's silver hair across her face in a way that made her look, for the first time, not like an administrator, but like someone caught in a wind she couldn't control. Keller grabbed the microphone. This is a fabrication. Her voice was steady. Practiced. But too fast. Half a beat too fast the way voices get when the script has been abandoned and improvisation is required. This woman was terminated for cause. She stole confidential documents. She is working with a known vigilante organization led by a man with a documented history of violence. Then explain the suicide report, Amy said. I had nothing to do with... Explain how a false death report was filed in the Salem PD system at 4 a.m. this morning using credentials that trace back to a DHS administrative account registered to your office. Keller's mouth opened, closed. The cameras caught it. Every lens, every angle. The infinite, unblinking eye of public scrutiny. Focused on a woman who had spent 9 years hiding in bureaucratic shadows, suddenly dragged into light so bright it burned. Then Deacon stepped forward. He held up his phone. On the screen, video. Grainy. Dark. Shot from a moving motorcycle. But clear enough. Unmistakable. 2 SUVs. Black. No plates. Pursuing 4 motorcycles through Portland's industrial district at high speed. And then, sudden, sharp, the sound splitting the phone's tiny speaker. Gunshots. Muzzle flashes from the lead SUV's passenger window. Sparks blooming against concrete loading docks. The scream of tires. The deep, desperate roar of Harley engines pushed past their limits by men riding for their lives. This is from last night, Deacon said. His voice carried. Calm. Steady. The voice of a former Marine who had briefed generals and didn't raise his volume because he didn't need to. Margaret Keller sent armed contractors to eliminate us after we retrieved Amy Brennan from Salem. They opened fire on a public road. We have the footage. We have the bullet casings. And we have the vehicle registration for the lead SUV, which traces to a private security firm contracted by the Oregon Department of Human Services, contract approved and signed by Margaret Keller. The crowd went silent. Not quiet. Silent. The kind of silence that happens when a room full of people simultaneously understand something they hadn't understood a moment ago, and the understanding is too large and too ugly to fit inside the noise they were making. Then, from the back of the crowd, a woman's voice. Clear. Authoritative. Cutting through the silence the way a blade cuts through tension. Not ending it, but redirecting it towards something final. Margaret Keller. Detective Maria Garcia. She emerged from behind the police line wearing a blazer and a badge and an expression that looked like it had been carved from the same granite as the building behind her. She walked up the steps. In her right hand, a folded document. She held it up. Federal warrant, Garcia said. Issued 30 minutes ago by a judge in the District of Oregon. Wire fraud, conspiracy to commit child abuse, obstruction of justice, and filing a false death report with the intent to obstruct a federal investigation. Keller's face went white. Not gradually. All at once. The color drained from it the way blood drains from a severed limb. Fast, complete, irreversible. You can't, she started. Margaret Keller, you are under arrest. This is a political stunt. My attorneys will... Your attorneys can meet you at booking. Turn around. Keller didn't turn. She stood behind the podium gripping its edges with both hands, and her face, the mask, the warmth, the 9-year facade of a woman who had turned deaf children into revenue, collapsed. Not slowly, not dramatically. It collapsed the way structures collapse when the foundation gives out, all at once, in every direction, until what was standing a moment ago is nothing but rubble and dust and the terrible exposed truth of what had been hidden inside the walls. She screamed, not words, not a protest, a sound, raw, formless. The sound of someone whose control has failed so completely that what comes out is not language but the animal noise beneath it. The scream of a person who has been performing for so long that when the performance ends, there is nothing left but sound. Officers moved in, two from each side, hands on her arms, her body convulsed, twisting, clawing, her nails catching the sleeve of one officer and leaving a red line on his wrist. She kicked, she spat, she screamed again and again until her voice cracked and became something guttural and broken, and the cameras recorded every second of it with the merciless, unblinking patience of machines that don't look away because they can't. They dragged her down the steps in handcuffs. The crowd erupted, and Grimm stood at the bottom of those steps, watching it happen, watching a woman who had built an empire on the silence of children get dragged through the loudest moment of her life. And he felt nothing. Not triumph, not relief, not satisfaction, nothing. Because Torres was still dead, and Webb was still dead, and Lily still had burns on her arms, and Sarah Wen still flinched when men raised their hands, and Marcus Reed still had 40 welts on his back, and Amy Brennan was still a 26-year-old woman who had been erased from existence by the system she tried to fix. Victory didn't feel like winning, it felt like surviving, and surviving, Grimm knew, was not the same as being saved. His phone buzzed. He looked down. One message, 2 words that cut through the noise and the cameras and the helicopters and the screaming crowd, and found the only part of him that was still capable of feeling something. Come home. He stared at the screen. The letters blurred. Not tears. He was past tears. But something else. Something that had been locked behind his sternum since Kandahar, since the convoy, since the moment he heard Torres scream his name on the radio and couldn't answer. Something cracking. Something opening. He pocketed the phone. He looked at Deacon. Deacon was watching him the way Deacon always watched him, with the steady, unbreakable attention of a man who had followed him into worse places and would follow him into worse places still, not because the places were worth going to, but because letting Grimm go alone was never an option. It's not over, Grimm said. I know. The network, the other regions, the families, the kids we haven't found yet. I know. But tonight we go home, Deacon said, and tomorrow we ride again. Grimm nodded. He turned toward his bike. 14 Harleys waited. Amy stood among them, the canvas bag hanging from her shoulder, her face open and ruined and alive, so completely, defiantly alive, that it felt like an act of war against everyone who had tried to make her otherwise. He swung his leg over the Road King, kicked the engine. The sound rumbled up through his boots, through his legs, through his spine, until it settled in his chest next to the cracking thing that wouldn't stop cracking no matter how hard he tried to hold it together. Above them, the helicopters circled. Below them, the street was full of people. And somewhere between the sky and the pavement, in the space where noise became silence and silence became something that sounded almost like hope, 14 motorcycles pulled away from the DHS headquarters and rode north through a city that was, for the first time in a very long time, finally listening. The ride north from Salem took 53 minutes. Grimm didn't remember most of it. He remembered the sound. 14 engines in formation, a sound that had become so familiar over the years, it was less noise than pulse, less mechanical than biological. The shared heartbeat of men moving through space with a purpose that none of them could fully articulate, but all of them could feel. He remembered the sky. Still gray, still pressing, but different now. Lighter at the edges the way Oregon skies get in late afternoon when the clouds thin enough to suggest that somewhere above them the sun still exists, still burns, still does its work, whether anyone below can see it or not. He remembered Amy's arms around his waist, tighter than before. Not from fear this time, from exhaustion. The total, cellular exhaustion of a woman who had been running on cortisol and conviction for 3 months, and had just watched both of those things reach their conclusion on the steps of the building where her life had been simultaneously destroyed and redeemed. They pulled into the Iron Saints clubhouse at 2:14 p.m. The parking lot was already full. Trucks, cars, 3 unmarked police vehicles, a news van from a Portland station that had tracked the convoy north. And at the far end of the lot, parked beneath the leafless oak tree that had been growing there since before the building was a body shop, and before the body shop was anything at all, a familiar blue pickup truck. Eden's truck. Grim killed his engine. The sudden silence hit him like a wall. His ears rang, his hands vibrated on the grips even after the motor stopped. Phantom tremors from hours of sustained RPM that his nerves couldn't let go of yet. He dismounted. His knees cracked. His lower back seized. 41 years old and his body felt 60. The accumulated debt of 2 tours, 10 years of insomnia, 2 days without sleep, and a night spent riding through winter rain while bullets sparked against concrete behind him. Amy climbed off. She stood on the asphalt and swayed once, caught herself, and pressed the canvas bag against her chest. The files. 214 pages that had cost her career, her identity, and very nearly her life. She looked at the clubhouse door, and then at Grim, and her face held a question she didn't ask out loud. What now? Go inside, Grim said. Judge has coffee. It's terrible. Drink it anyway. She almost smiled. It didn't quite make it to her mouth, but it reached her eyes. A flicker, brief and human. The first sign of something other than survival he'd seen on her face since the truck stop in Wilsonville. She went inside. Grim stayed in the lot. Because Eden was walking toward him. She came across the pavement with Lily beside her. Lily was wearing new clothes, a red sweater and jeans that actually fit, bought from somewhere Grim didn't know, paid for with money he didn't have. And her hair was brushed and her face was clean and the swelling around her left eye had gone down enough that she could see out of both of them for the first time since the night in the park. She held Eden's hand with the absolute grip of a child who has found the one thing in the world she will not let go of, and she walked with her head up, which was new. In the park, in the motel. In every moment since they'd found her, Lily's head had been down. Chin tucked, eyes on the floor. The posture of a child who had learned that being visible meant being hit. Her head was up now. Eden reached him. She stopped, looked at his face. Read it the way she read everything, with the fluency of a woman who had spent her life interpreting a world that didn't speak her language, who had learned to extract meaning from the angle of a jaw, the depth of a breath, the precise distance between a man's eyebrows when he was pretending to be fine and wasn't. She didn't sign. She didn't speak. She put her free hand on his chest, flat, palm down, over the place where his heart was doing something irregular and fast. And she held it there, feeling the rhythm, measuring the damage, deciding, with the diagnostic precision of someone who had been monitoring this particular machine for 6 years, whether it was still running or just shaking itself apart. Grim covered her hand with his. His fingers were cold, hers were warm. The difference felt like the distance between where he'd been and where he was trying to get to. Vast, thermal, uncrossable by anything except sustained contact. Lily tugged Eden's other hand. She wanted attention. Eden looked down. Lily signed something fast, her small hands moving with an urgency that was different from the desperate signing in the park. This was purposeful, excited. A child communicating because she wanted to, not because she was begging to be heard. Eden laughed. It was quiet, private, a sound Grim hadn't heard in weeks. She signed back to Lily, then looked at Grim. She wants to know if the motorcycles can stay here forever. Grim looked at Lily. She was staring at the row of Harleys the way other children stared at playgrounds. With pure, uncomplicated wonder, the first emotion she'd expressed that wasn't fear or pain or the blank dissociation of a child who'd learned to leave her body to survive. He crouched down. His knees protested. Everything protested. He got himself eye level with her and signed, slowly, badly, the grammar wrong in ways that would make Eden students wince. The motorcycles go where you go. Lily watched his hands. Then she looked at his face, at the scar. She reached out and touched it again, the way she had in the park. Gently, with one finger, tracing the line from temple to jaw with the careful attention of a child, cataloging the damage on someone she was deciding to trust. Then she signed one word. Home. Not a question. A statement. The way children say things when they've made a decision that the adults around them haven't caught up to yet. Eden's breath caught. Grim's didn't. His breath had stopped catching years ago, replaced by the tight, controlled rhythm of a man who had trained himself to breathe through anything. firefights, funerals, the particular agony of watching someone you couldn't save become someone you didn't save. But something behind his sternum, the cracking thing, the thing that had been opening since Salem, shifted again. Wider this time, enough that he could feel air moving through it, cold and clean, filling a space that had been sealed shut since Kandahar. He stood up, took Lily's other hand. The three of them walked into the clubhouse together, a scarred biker, a deaf woman, and a 7-year-old girl. And from across the parking lot, Deacon watched them go with his prosthetic hand hanging at his side and his real hand pressed against his mouth, holding in something that might have been a word or might have been the sound a man makes when he sees the person he's followed into the worst places in the world finally walk into a good one. The weeks that followed were not triumphant. They were necessary. And necessity, Grimm learned, looks nothing like the movies. Margaret Keller's arrest triggered a cascade that no single person could have predicted and no single organization could have managed. Federal investigators descended on DHS offices in Salem, Eugene, and Portland with warrants and hard drives and the grim, meticulous energy of people whose job is to disassemble corruption one document at a time. The shell companies were traced, frozen, and dissolved. The foster families in Keller's network were identified, investigated, and in 11 cases arrested. 23 children were removed from placements in the first 72 hours. By the end of the second week, the number was 39. 39 children, 18 of them deaf, all of them carrying damage that would take years to surface and decades to heal, if it ever healed at all. The public responded the way publics do, with outrage that burned hot and brief, a wildfire of social media posts and opinion columns and cable news segments that consumed the story for 10 days and then moved on to the next one, leaving behind a landscape of scorched attention and unanswered questions that only the people closest to the fire would spend the rest of their lives trying to answer. Amy Brennan's resurrection became the story within the story. The faked suicide report was traced to a DHS administrative login that Keller had shared with a former state police sergeant named Dale Combs, a man who had been collecting monthly payments from Keller's LLC for 4 years and who was arrested in his Medford apartment wearing boxers and a look of bewildered resignation, as if he'd always known this day would come and had simply been waiting for it to arrive. Amy testified before a federal grand jury. She testified before a state legislative committee. She testified in a room full of cameras and microphones and the kind of institutional attention that should have been directed at the problem years ago, but only materialized after the problem had become a scandal, because that is how systems work. Not by preventing failure, but by performing concern after the failure is too public to ignore. She cried once, during the grand jury testimony, when they asked her to describe what she'd seen in the files, the placement records, the compliance waivers, the emails where Keller referred to deaf children as low communication placements, with the clinical detachment of someone sorting inventory. Her voice broke. Not dramatically, not for the cameras. It broke the way real things break, quietly and in a place that can't be repaired, and the room went silent and she collected herself and continued, because Amy Brennan was 26 years old and had already survived being erased from existence, and she was not going to be stopped by her own tears. Grimm did not testify. Garcia advised against it. Judge insisted against it. The Kandahar article had done its work. Grimm's face was now associated with violence and failure in the public imagination, and putting him on a witness stand would give Keller's defense attorneys exactly what they needed to redirect the narrative from institutional corruption to biker vigilantism. So Grimm stayed out of the courtrooms and away from the cameras and let the people with badges and briefcases do the work that badges and briefcases were designed for. And he didn't complain about it, because complaining required a belief that fairness existed, and he had lost that belief somewhere between Kandahar and Laurelhurst Park. But he rode. Every morning. Before dawn. He took the Road King out of the driveway of the small blue house on Gladstone Street that he and Eden had been renting for 3 years, the house with the leaking kitchen faucet and the back porch that needed repainting, and the spare bedroom that had been empty since they moved in, because neither of them had ever said out loud what the spare bedroom was for. And he rode through Portland's wet, dark streets with the engine rumbling beneath him and the cold cutting his face and the city sliding past like a film strip of someone else's life. He rode past Laurelhurst Park, past the pond, past the spot where Lily had emerged from the tree line in the rain with her hands clenched inside sleeves too long for her arms. He didn't stop. He didn't need to. The place existed in his memory now, with the same permanence as Kandahar, a fixed point, an axis, a moment where the before became the after, and the person he was became the person he would be for the rest of his life. He rode to the cemetery. He went every Thursday, same time, same route. The cemetery sat on a hill in southeast Portland, tucked between a neighborhood of craftsman houses and a stretch of industrial lots that smelled like diesel and cut metal. It wasn't where Torres and Webb were buried. Torres was in San Antonio, Webb in Akron. But it was where Grimm had placed 2 stones 6 years ago, side by side, beneath a Douglas fir, with their names and dates and nothing else. No epitaph. No sentiment. Just names and dates, and the implicit understanding that anyone who needed more than that didn't know them well enough for the words to matter. He stood there in the cold, hands in his pockets, helmet under his arm. The rain was light, a mist, really, the kind Portland specializes in, the kind that doesn't fall so much as exist, suspended in the air like a permanent condition of the atmosphere. He talked to them. Not out loud. Not at first. He stood there, and he thought the things he always thought. I'm sorry, I made the wrong call, you deserved better. And then, one Thursday in late November, with the fir tree dripping onto his shoulders and the distant hum of the freeway filling the silence, he said something new. I found someone. His voice was rough, unused. He didn't talk much anymore, even less than before, and when he did, the words came out with the dry, reluctant sound of a mechanism that hadn't been maintained. A little girl, deaf, 7 years old. Someone was hurting her and nobody was listening. We, Eden and I, we took her in. She's ours now. Ours now, or we're hers. I'm not sure how it works. He paused. The mist settled on the stones, on his jacket, on the scars. She touches my face, the scar. She just reaches up and touches it, like it's a thing she needs to check. Like she's making sure it's still there. And I let her. Because I think she understands something about damage that the rest of the world doesn't. That it's not a thing to hide. It's just a thing that happened, and you keep going. He stopped talking. He stood there for a long time. The mist turned to rain. The rain turned to cold. The cold turned to something that felt less like weather and more like permission. The slow, grudging release of a weight that he had been carrying so long he'd forgotten it was separate from his body. He didn't forgive himself. He wasn't sure he ever would. But he understood, standing in that cemetery with the rain on his face and the stones at his feet, that forgiveness was not the point. The point was not to undo what had been done. The point was to do what came next, to take the hands that had made the wrong call in Kandahar and use them to sign clumsy, imperfect ASL to a 7-year-old girl who had never been told she was worth protecting. To take the guilt and the sleeplessness and the voices in his head and convert them, not into peace, because peace was too much to ask for, but into motion, into purpose, into the stubborn daily act of showing up for someone who needed him to be standing. I can't fix what I did, he said to the stones, but I can do this. The rain answered, the way rain always answers in Portland, by continuing. The adoption hearing was on a Tuesday in December, courtroom 4B, Multnomah County, a room with fluorescent lights and wood-paneled walls, and the particular institutional smell of floor polish and old paper that every American courtroom shares regardless of state or jurisdiction. Every Iron Saint was there. They filled the gallery in leather cuts and heavy boots, 14 men plus 3 prospects, sitting in the wooden pews with the rigid, uncomfortable posture of people who are accustomed to open roads and garage floors and do not know what to do with their bodies in rooms designed for stillness. Deacon sat in the front row with his prosthetic hand resting on his knee and his real hand holding a handkerchief he would later deny owning. Boone sat beside him, massive and red-bearded and dabbing his eyes with the back of his wrist every 45 seconds. Ratchet stood against the wall because sitting made him restless, and he watched the proceedings with the focused, clinical attention of a medic monitoring a patient through a critical procedure. Judge had filed the paperwork. Despite being disbarred, he had prepared the adoption petition with the precision of a man who understood that the law is a blunt instrument, but occasionally, under specific conditions, it can be used as a scalpel. A family court attorney named Linda Cho had agreed to present the case pro bono after reading Amy's testimony in the newspaper, and she stood before the judge with a file folder and a calm voice and the practiced efficiency of someone who believed that paperwork, done correctly, could occasionally save a life. Lily sat between Grim and Eden at the petitioner's table. She wore a blue dress that Eden had bought from a second-hand shop on Hawthorne and altered by hand because Lily's arms were still too thin for anything off the rack. Her hair was braided. Her hands were folded in her lap. She looked impossibly small in the oversized chair, her feet dangling 6 inches above the floor, and she watched the proceedings with the wide, attentive eyes of a child who understands that something important is happening even if she doesn't yet understand what. Eden interpreted everything, every word the judge said, every question the attorney asked, every procedural formality that the court required. Eden's hands translated it all into the language that Lily had spent her entire life being denied, and was now, finally, being given. Not as a privilege, not as an accommodation, as a right. The right of a child to understand the moment her life changes. The judge, a 60th woman named Patricia Huang, who had presided over family court for 21 years and had the gentle, weathered face of someone who had seen both the best and worst of what families could be, asked Lily one question. Eden signed it. Do you want to live with Rex and Eden Cross? Lily didn't hesitate. She didn't look at Grim. She didn't look at Eden. She looked at the judge with both eyes, both open, both clear, the swelling gone. The bruise faded to a yellow ghost beneath the skin that would disappear entirely within a week, and she signed one word. Yes. Judge Huang signed the order, and Lily became Lily Cross. The courtroom didn't erupt. It wasn't that kind of moment. What happened was quieter, more physical. A collective exhale. 14 men in leather releasing breath they didn't know they'd been holding, the sound of it filling the courtroom like wind through an open window. Deacon pressed this handkerchief to his face. Boone stopped pretending he wasn't crying. Ratchet, against the wall, closed his eyes and let his head tip back until it rested against the wood paneling, and his lips moved in a phrase that nobody could hear and he would never repeat. Grim put his hand on Lily's shoulder. She turned in her chair and reached up and touched his scar, one finger, tracing the line, temple to jaw. The ritual she had invented in the park and performed every day since. Her way of checking, confirming, making sure the damaged thing was still there and still working. He let her. Eden put her hand over Grim's. 3 hands, 3 people, the smallest family in the courtroom and the one that had cost the most to build. That night, they went home. The blue house on Gladstone Street. Eden made tea, chamomile, the same blend she'd been making every night since Lily arrived, because the smell calmed the girl in ways that words couldn't reach. Grim sat at the kitchen table with a cup he wasn't drinking and a phone he wasn't checking, and the particular stillness of a man who has spent so long in motion that being stationary feels like a foreign country. Lily was asleep, had been since 8:30. The spare bedroom, the room with no name, the room they'd never discussed, was now her room. It had a bed with a purple comforter, a nightlight shaped like a star, a row of stuffed animals on the dresser that Eden had collected from donations and thrift stores, each one carefully selected for softness, because Lily had a thing about textures, a sensitivity that nobody had noticed or cared about until Eden recognized it as a trauma response and started filling the girl's environment with things that were gentle against skin. The nightlight was on. The door was open 3 inches. Lily's preference, discovered through trial and error, the precise gap that allowed enough light in without making her feel exposed. Grim checked it twice before sitting down. He would check it again before bed. He would check it in the middle of the night when the insomnia woke him and his feet carried him down the hallway on autopilot, drawn to the door by the same force that had drawn him to the window in Eugene and the porch in Molalla and every other place where a child was sleeping and someone needed to make sure the dark stayed outside. Eden sat across from him, tea steaming, eyes tired. The kind of tired that sleep wouldn't fix because it wasn't physical. It was the exhaustion of a woman who had spent 3 months translating horrors and carrying a child's fear in her hands and building a family out of broken materials without a blueprint. She signed to him across the table. Slow, private. The intimate ASL of a marriage that had survived war and silence, and the particular strain of loving a man who carried 2 dead soldiers inside his chest like shrapnel that would never surface. How do you feel? He thought about it. Not the reflexive fine that he used to deflect everyone else. He actually thought about it. Sat with the question. Let it move through the places in his body where feelings lived when they weren't being suppressed. He signed back, slowly. The grammar imperfect, the meaning precise. Like I'm starting something I don't know how to finish. Eden smiled. Small, real. The smile of a woman who understood that the man sitting across from her would never be fixed. That the nightmares would continue and the guilt would persist, and there would be mornings when he couldn't get out of bed and nights when he couldn't stay in it. And who had chosen to be there anyway? Not because she believed in healing, but because she believed in presence, in the stubborn daily act of showing up for someone who couldn't show up for himself. That's what family is, she signed. Grim looked at her hands, at the words they made in the kitchen light, at the tea cooling between them, at the hallway behind her where a sliver of star-shaped light fell across the floor from a room where a girl named Lily Cross was sleeping without flinching for the first time in her life. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. Outside, rain began. Light at first, then steady, then persistent. The Portland rain that never stops, that seeps into everything, that soaks the streets and fills the gutters, and turns the city into something shimmering and dark and alive in a way that dry places never are. It hit the windows. It hit the roof. It hit the row of motorcycles parked in the driveway. Grimm's Road King and Eden's smaller Sportster, side by side, chrome catching the streetlight in wet silver flashes. Grimm's phone buzzed. He looked at it. A message from Deacon. Got a call from a family in Bend. Deaf kid. 8 years old. Foster system. They say nobody's listening. Grim stared at the screen. The blue light illuminated his face. The scar. The hollow eyes. The jaw that hadn't fully unclenched since Kandahar, and probably never would. He read the message twice. 3 times. He put the phone down, picked up his tea, took a sip. It was warm and tasted like flowers and smelled like the kitchen of a home that had a child in it, which was a smell he hadn't known he needed until it was there. He looked at Eden. She had read the message over his shoulder. Her face held no surprise, no frustration, no weariness. Just the quiet, steady recognition of a woman who had married a man who would always ride toward the next broken thing and had made peace with that the way sailors make peace with the sea. Not by conquering it, but by understanding that it would never stop moving and choosing to stay on the water anyway. Go? She signed. He shook his head. Not tonight. Tonight was for the tea, for the house, for the star-shaped nightlight and the sleeping girl and the sound of rain on a roof that belonged to them. Tonight was for being still, for sitting in a kitchen with a woman who spoke his language, all of his languages, the spoken ones and the signed ones and the silent ones that lived in the space between breaths, and letting the stillness be enough. Tomorrow, he would ride. He picked up the phone, typed one word. The same word he had typed in a motel parking lot a lifetime ago. The same word he would type again and again for as long as the phone rang and the engine started and his hands were steady enough to grip the bars. Yes. He put the phone down. He drank his tea. Eden reached across the table and took his hand, the one with the barbed wire skull tattoo, the one that had held weapons and handlebars and a little girl's fingers in the rain, and she held it, not tightly, not loosely, with the exact pressure of someone who knows how much weight the thing they're holding can bear. The rain fell. The nightlight glowed. And in a small blue house on a quiet street in Portland, Oregon, a family that had been built from wreckage and rain and the stubborn refusal to look away sat together in the kitchen and listened to the silence. Not the silence of abandonment, not the silence of neglect, not the terrible, weaponized silence that Margaret Keller had used to hide the suffering of children, but a different silence, a safe one, the kind you choose, the kind that means someone is finally home.